Yeah, you get two of us for the price of one seat.
Lock and load.
Connecting the dots.
We'll call the meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I'll introduce the panel members first. Robert Phillip to the far left, Rod Merritt to my left, and I'm Marcel Larondo. I'll be chairing. Our assessor today is Stephen Lobenstein. Huda, right? Huda Aziz is going to be our administrative assistant today. We'll be hearing applications for revision of assessment role in accordance with the Municipal Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussions to those matters. The statements that the applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessment of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decision with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to applications of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board order. With respect to the hearing process, I'll confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. And the session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Please make sure your phones are on silent. Swear them in, please.
Would you like to affirm or swear? Please state your full name.
Stephen Lobenstein.
And do you affirm the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Would you like to swear or affirm? Please stand. Please state your full name. And do you swear the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Would you like to swear or affirm? Please state your full name.
Timothy Boulay.
And do you swear the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Can you read your name down before
Sure.
we press that?
Stefan, when you are ready.
Okay, the roll number is 0900-257-8600. It's 2500 Day Street. The assessed value is $8,941,000. The actual years and effective year build, well, the effective year builds from 1961 to 2018. The wall heights range from 9 feet to 38 feet. The construction class is fireproof structural steel frame, and the zoning is M3 heavy manufacturing. The land area is 2,154,096 square feet. There is a basement area that we're not including in the leasable area, which the basement area is 67,450 square feet. The gross floor and the leasable area 184,123 square feet, and the land to plant area is 11.85. The buildings, the majority of the buildings were built, well, in 1958. 156,664 square feet of it. The manufacturing part of it was built in 1958. At that time, well, there was a small office built in 1958, which has been slowly added to. If we look at pictures on page 9, you can get a view of where it is on Day Street. It's near Gun Road, just the intersection of Day Street and Gun Road in Transcona. Looking further down, you can get an overhead view of the picture. You can see the large land area that is part of this property. Turning to page 10, you can get a view of the property from an aerial look. It's important to note that there was a fire in this building in 2015. It has since been renovated, which is why we have the effective year built, ranging between 1961 and 2018. There are permits on the back to show the construction that has been taking place on this building. The building was inspected last cycle to confirm that the construction was completed, which it has been. So while the construction is being completed, the department reduced the space to the leasable area to 174,576 square feet. We've now increased it back up to 184,123 square feet since the construction has been completed. This property is a foundry. It's for manufacturing railway wheels, which is why when you look at the pictures on page 10, you can see the tracks running in behind the building and into the property. And on page 9, it probably gives you a better overhead look at where the tracks are running. So that's a little history about the property. We are assessing for excess land on this property due to the size of it. So turning to page 4, you can see the land comparables for excess land. The comparables are Lagimodier, Mazenot, and Black Diamond Road. They are close in proximity to the subject property as they're in the St. Boniface Industrial Park and by the Symington Yards as well. The zonings are M1, M3, and M3, so the zonings are similar to the subject property. The land areas, so we're assessing for 583,314 square feet of excess land. The comparables range from 371,083 square feet all the way up to 690,456 square feet. It's important to note that comparable 2 and comparable 3 are not serviced at the time of sale. And looking down further, we can see the price per square foot they sold for. The comparable sold between $3.63 up to $3.77, and the assessed value per square foot is $3.02 to give a value of $1,874,457. Turning to page 3, you can see the rent comparables. They range in rent from $2.96 a square foot all the way up to $5.25 a square foot. The effective years built range from 1956 all the way up to 1979. The wall heights range from 16 feet up to 31 feet, and the leased areas range from 90,257 all the way up to 175,000 square feet, and the lease terms range from 2 years all the way up to 11 years. The rent comparables are sort of spread throughout the city, as due to the size of this city, there's not a lot of size of this building, there's not a lot of rent comparables. So they're on Sargent, Inkster, Sherwin, Mission, Peak, and McLeod. So turning to page 5, you can see the income workup. We're applying $2.91 a square foot to 184,123 square feet for potential rent of $535,798. We're applying a 2.5% vacancy, 2% expenses, and a 7% capitalization rate for an estimated value. And then, of course, for an estimated value of $7,067,043. We're then applying the additional land value to an estimated value of $8,941,000. So turning to page 7, you can see the industrial capitalization rates. It's in the chart. This one falls between the 20th and the 80th percentile at 7%. If you look over at the CBRE and the Cushman Wakefield in the chart, it falls between their parameters as well. The capitalization rate evidence is on page 12. The industrial charts at the bottom of the page. These are just examples of capitalization rates actually sold in the market. Our non-recoverable expense samplings on page 13. And of course the mailers at the back. This is a fully owner-occupied building. It's on page 14 and 15. So we feel the value of $8,941,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Mr. Chapel, you have some questions for the assessor?
Yes, just a few, Mr. Chairman. You've added $1,874,000 of additional value because of what you call additional land, is that correct?
Correct.
How much is the additional land in area?
Additional land in the area, I believe I said, like for the excess or the total additional?
The excess
Well,
land?
we're applying 583,314.
So that'd be about 13 acres.
Approximately 13.39 acres.
And is that area ever being utilized?
Not to my knowledge, it has not been utilized. They do, as we can see from the pictures, they do utilize quite a bit of the surrounding area around the building. So some of the land is utilized, but is all be utilized? I would say no.
And the additional land, if I suggest to you that that's always being kept in place as a buffer because of the quarry or foundry operation, would you agree?
I would not have any prior knowledge of that. So.
You don't know if it's a buffer?
I don't know. I don't know why they keep that land. No, and have not developed on it or sold it off. No.
I see. And this has existed since 1958?
I believe it has, yes.
Yes. And normally when you use an income approach, do you add additional land?
Only if there is additional land.
Only if there is additional land. And what determines additional land?
Well, typically we have a land to building ratio for these. So a normal land to building ratio would be 3, 4, or 5. Anything, when you start getting up into the 6-to-1 land to building ratio, you'll just start to see excess land.
I see. So there's no, it's just an arbitrary number that you come up with, is that correct?
There is definitely some theory behind it, which is appraisal theory, so I don't believe it's an arbitrary number.
Well, but you're not an appraiser, are you?
I'm personally, no, I'm not an appraiser, no.
So what's the theory in determining the additional land?
Well, the idea is the additional land is you have the ability to subdivide it and sell it off, so you can put a value on it.
I'm sorry, I had a little disturbance here. I didn't hear your answer.
Sorry, the idea behind the excess land is that you have the ability to subdivide it and sell it off if need to.
I see. And if I suggest to you that you can't subdivide or sell off this additional land because of the principal use, would you agree with that?
I would not agree with that, no.
You don't agree with that?
No, I don't see why they cannot sell off a portion of this land.
Did you consult with the planning division?
I have not.
Make that determination?
Nope, I have not. But I have not heard why they cannot subdivide it.
I see.
Yeah.
But you don't know that you can subdivide?
I don't see why you couldn't. It's serviced land. It could be subdivided.
Well, because of the...
You can put that in your evidence, Mr.
Yes, I
Chapel.
will. I will.
He's already said he doesn't
Yes.
know, so.
Tim, do you have any questions?
I guess my one question about the building, have you been inside the building?
I personally have not been in the building, but it has been inspected on the 2 previous cycles by other assessors.
You mentioned the use as a foundry. Would you consider that to be a heavy use,
Absolutely.
a heavy industrial use, one that would have a higher wear and tear on a building than some other industrial uses?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. Those are the questions, Mr. Chairman.
Ron, do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Ron?
Yes. The total site is 49.5 acres. So the excess land is 13 acres?
Yeah, 13.
So about 26% excess land. And what was the value? I see the value, but what was the rate per square foot? I just never got that.
The rate per square foot?
For the excess.
We have $3.02 is our rate for
$3.02.
139,989 per acre.
100 and what?
39,989.
So is this excess land or surplus land?
This is excess land.
Pardon?
excess.
And I see from the pictures, and I can't quite decipher it, but there's 7 buildings on the site?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Correct.
So on your page 9, what, is that the spur line that goes through the property?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the lower section, is that part of the land too? In blue? Or,
The lower section.
well, this section down here?
No.
No?
No.
So it just consists of this?
Yes.
Okay. And what exactly is it at the top portion, what runs at the very top?
At the very top
Yeah.
portion there, I believe that is another rail line, is it?
Okay, that's the rail line?
Yeah.
So is there a spur going into the subject?
You can see that there are
Yeah.
a few lines running
Okay.
into the subject property.
Does the spur go right inside the building? Do you know offhand?
I believe it does, yes.
Okay.
I think you can see that on page 10. You can see a line at the bottom of page 10. You can see a line running right into the building.
Yeah. Okay. Any office component in the building?
Not in the building, there's an office off to it. Right where the red dot is on the page 9, that is the office building itself.
Okay.
I thought I mentioned it, but maybe not. It's 8,385 square feet is the office. A portion of it was originally built in 1958, an addition in 1996, and then another addition in 2005.
You talked about a fire that happened in 15?
Correct.
Maybe you can tell us about that or what?
My understanding is that it didn't stop any of the manufacturing. It happened more in the storage area. There's about 9,500 square feet of leasable area that we took out at the time that would have accounted for where the fire was. So, and we've since put that square footage back in.
Okay. That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman.
On with your presentation, Mr. Chad.
You have my appraisal here. I'll just get you guys to flip to the page, third or fourth page in is a summary of the salient facts. You'll see here, I believe the city's done a good job of kind of giving an outline of the building. We're using the exact same building area, same year built, same total site area of the 49.5 acres. So, basically the real nuts and bolts, I think, aren't in question here. If you want to flip forward then to page 18 in the building description, just to highlight one or two sections.
Which page?
Page 18,
Number at the top.
Yeah, top.
top right, sorry. Yeah. Just a couple of highlights. Again, you'll notice that 85% of the total building area was constructed in 1958. So while it's a wide range from 1958 to 2018 of construction dates, the vast majority of the building is a 1958 structure. And again, as pointed out, it's a foundry for manufacturing railway wheels. So it's a pretty heavy use. And again, just commenting here in the last paragraph on the fire in 2015, it really affected mostly the storage area at the rear of the plant. So there were some repairs to the roof, the building lighting, some of the structure and the electrical infrastructure, but it didn't affect the maximum production capacity at all. It's basically the same capacity is there now that was prior to the fire. If you flip forward to page 22 now, I've also done an evaluation of some excess land for the property. Page 22. You'll see an outlined area in red. That's really for illustration purposes, but for my exercise, that's sort of the area that we looked at as vacant land. You will note that I used 15 acres of excess land versus the approximately 13 that the city used. So a slight difference in opinion there, but it's a fairly small change, small difference. flipping forward to page 28, it shows a summary of the sales that were used. There's 5 sales, mostly in the St. Boniface Industrial Park. That's where mostly the larger industrial land for sale is available. So doing my analysis on page 29, I come up with a value of $140,000 per acre. So basically the exact same value per acre that the city has come up with, but a slightly different area. So with my slightly larger area, I have an excess land value of $2.1 million. So again, a slightly higher value overall for excess land, but the same value on a per acre basis. Going forward, we go to the income approach. Page 31 shows a summary of rental rates. Again, given the large size of the building, we have rental rates from all over the city. These 5 comparables have a range of rental rates from $3.12 up to $6.16 per square foot. With my analysis in the following pages, you see on page 33, end up using a rental rate of $3.75 a square foot. Again, this is higher. This is a little higher than the city, based on the comparable data that we have. The next page, page 34, I use a vacancy rate of 10% given several factors. One, we're talking about a 184,000 square foot industrial specialized use building. It's a very large building. It's designed for a special use. It's not located in one of the main industrial parks. So, any kind of vacancy rate similar to city averages, I think, was just very conservative. I think if this building were to be vacant, the number of potential users for this would be very limited, and I think you would see a rather long vacancy period if it were ever to be vacant and try to be leased out. I think the next main focus here is page 37, where we come in with the capitalization rate analysis. I've got 5 sales of industrial buildings, again, located throughout the city. The rental rate, or the capitalization rates range from 6.85 up to 9.32%. Again, they're various sized industrial buildings located throughout the city. The next page, again, I discussed the CBRE range of industrial rates. They show 6.5 to 7.25%, which is fairly similar to what the comparables are showing. I end up using a higher capitalization rate of 9%, and there's really a few reasons for that. Number one is, again, this is a large industrial building, 184,000 square feet. This is a specialized use. It was built for the intended user for an intended use. And this intended use is a very heavy industrial use. This building is going to depreciate at a much significantly faster rate compared to a standard industrial building. So the economic life of this building, without significant repairs to the building, it's going to just wear out that much quicker. So to consider a cap rate, of a typical industrial building, I don't think is appropriate at all. Just given, again, the large size of specialized use, and especially the heavy use of the building. So page 39 is a summary of the income approach, summarizing the rent and the vacancy rate. So you see the capitalized value is just nearly $6 million, plus the value of the excess land of 2.1 is a total rounded value of $8.1 million. And just I have done a few sales as well for the direct comparison approach. Page 47 is a summary of the 7 sales that I have. You'll see sales 1 to 5 occurred during the 2-year period for the assessment cycle. None of those buildings are really similar. To be honest, there was no sales of heavy industrial buildings over the 2-year time frame. I have included comparables number 6 and 7. They did occur slightly prior to the 2-year cycle of 2016 to 2018. I've included those because those are really the most recent sale of physically comparable buildings to the subject. You see they sold for $29 and $31 a square foot. So even accounting for a time adjustment, I've ended up on page 49 using a final value of $34 a square foot to apply to the building area. Adding that, the vacant, the excess land value of 2.1 again comes up with a value of 8.3 million on page 49. And then on the following page is a summary of the two approaches of $8.1 million and $8.36 million. I've applied equal emphasis on both approaches to come up with a final value of $8.225 million.
Mr. Broati, you used 15 acres of additional land or surplus land, whatever terminology we're going to use, and I guess the assessors used approximately 13 acres, is that correct?
Correct.
Why did you use, or why did you apply the surplus land or additional land?
The 15 acres?
Yes.
Again, similar to what the city assessor has stated, that based on what the market conditions, what's considered typical, that based on the land to building ratio, felt that 15 acres was approximately the excess land.
If I were to suggest to you that this land could not be developed because it's needed for buffering for the principal use, would you agree?
It's definitely possible. I'm not familiar with the reasoning, but it's definitely possible that with a use this heavy, they might consider the neighboring properties, but I can't state that for certain.
Okay. That's my question.
It's your time to give your presentation.
It's my presentation now.
You're both together, so we'll ask questions after.
Yeah.
So carry on.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, there was a fire that the assessor has indicated in 2015. That was in the warehousing portion of the building, and the damage was $38 million. That's what the insurance company paid to rebuild the approximate 10,000 square feet of warehousing space and the electrical system in the whole building and to meet the code requirements. The production of the wheels has never changed. It's the same amount now as it was back in '58. The company feels that the excess land or additional land is wrong. It's zone M3. Has been since '58. It's kept in its dormant state, aside from maintaining the grass and using the ball field, as a buffer. And the reason it's been a buffer is that the prevailing winds are northwest, and the particulate mass discharge from the furnace then emits into the air, and this land has to be reserved so that you can't use it for any other purpose, because the particulate mass falls. They use it for a ball field, but it has no particular use. It's just a buffer to their principal operation. The assessor has always used additional land as a value component. We don't want to go and disturb the classification or use of the land to take it from M3 to PR when you know that you're going to pollute it. That doesn't make very much sense. So it's kept as M3, but that doesn't have the value. And in the north, you'll see, if you look at page 9 of the assessor's brief, you have the land immediately north is used for the slag. They take the slag from the foundry and put it on the north site. We don't own that. It's leased. I'm referring just to the north of the red dot. And then next door to it is the border chemical site. And so that we don't need to buffer on that northern limit the same way we do on the south limit. We would agree that whether it's 13 or 15 acres, it's a large piece of land that doesn't have a use. Those are the comments I have, Mr. Chairman, other than saying that there'd be argument on that, Mr. Roatti's report.
Questions?
Yeah, I have a few questions. Speaking about the land, you commented and said that it's a buffer, but you see development of buildings directly across the street from the subject property.
Across Bay Street, yes.
Yeah, so would you consider those closer to the actual building than the excess land?
Absolutely.
So why do they not have a buffer on that side then?
Because those buildings are not owned by us, number one. Number two, the prevailing wind is northwest 75% of the time. And we get complaints from particular mass on the properties across from Day Street during the course of operations, and we pay to repaint the cars and do whatever's necessary to try and remedy the issues. We want to keep our plant operating, and that's a cost of operation.
So, but that being said, so would you agree that it is possible to develop this land in the state it's in now?
If the boundary is there, I don't think so, sir.
You don't think so? Like there's no restrictions on development? It's just...
I don't think that you get a planning approval from the gentleman that's planning or from the political process to subdivide and develop.
Okay.
Not with this use in place. If the boundary was not there, absolutely you could develop it.
Okay. So some questions about the vacancy. You've applied 10%. Did you use market information for that?
Yeah, I think you see on page 34, we do use we quote the Johnson report showing that investment properties have a citywide vacancy rate of 7.3%. And again, given some of the reasons that I spoke of regarding the large size and the specific use, I felt it was prudent to go above the average vacancy investment rate of 7.3%.
And if I'm just reading this, you highlighted Transcona because that's the area it's in here. Are those the rates that you're kind of using for comparables?
That's part of it. So again, the Transcona highlighted is all industrial properties, so that's definitely taken into consideration. And then the citywide average vacancy rate for investment properties of 7.3%.
Okay. So for the Transcona, when using the Johnson report, would you agree that there's very few industrial buildings in Transcona?
Yeah, it's one of the smaller industrial areas.
So if one of the larger buildings had a vacancy, it would definitely move up the vacancy rate?
Yeah, you see there's been a large flux from 4.4 to 13% over the last 5 years in Transcona. So again, the 10% falls within that range of the Transcona district.
So do you feel it might be more accurate then for the Transcona to use the overall city Winnipeg vacancy rate for that area?
I think the overall citywide vacancy rate for investment properties would be most applicable at the 7.3%. Just if we're going to look at this from an income point of view, the investment property I think is the most applicable vacancy rate.
So you also use the comparable approach to evaluation. I just have one question about that on page. On page 42, we use 96 Powell Avenue. I'm just wondering why you didn't use this one in your cap rate study as well, if it's comparable to using the comparable approach.
I don't believe I have the financial information of that property to calculate a capitalization rate.
If I told you that it's sold for a cap rate of 3.34%, would you agree?
I don't have any financial information. I would suggest any improved property that's sold for a 3.3% cap rate, there's got to be some reason for that. That's basically interest rates, so there would have to be, I would assume, a story behind that.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Ron?
Yes, Mr. Vardy, I guess you've used the direct sales comparison approach and concluded value on page 49.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so But you state in here that it should be noted that this does not include excess land or the excess of 15 acres.
Correct.
So you're just, your rate per square foot is based on your comparables, I would imagine, eh?
Right, I think I've attributed basically 35 acres of land to be with the building, and then added the 15 acres of excess land value on top of that.
But there's quite a variation in regards to the market value for the subject. I mean, for the comparables, it ranges from $30 roughly to $90.
Yeah, and I mean, that really comes down to the various types of industrial buildings that, as I mentioned before, none of these buildings are really similar to the subject in terms of being, that large and that specialized of a use. So again, comparables 1 to 5 have the wider range. I stuck with those sales just given the time frame, where number 6 and 7 are really more physically similar, but fall outside the last 2-year time frame.
And I just noticed that really you have one sale in Transcona on Panet Road, I guess, eh?
Yeah, again.
Orman might be close, I guess.
You know what? You see, I think there's only 1 or 2 buildings that are larger than the subject. You really have to go to the whole city for a building that this large and this specialized.
So, Mr. Boadi, in regards to your cap rate study, you've concluded 9% for the subject property.
Correct.
And your comparison here, summary, there's 5 sales, eh?
Correct.
Nothing, only 1 around the 9%.
Right. Like as I mentioned, the CBRE has a range of rates of 6.5 to 7.25. The city's information too. They've got all the different various sources stating all the different rates. The city of Winnipeg says the 20th percentile, the 8th percentile is 6.34 to 7.8%. Typical industrial building, that's what cap rates are. 6.25 to 7.5, 7.8%. And that's kind of proved by my comparables. But again, given the reasons I stated before, this subject property is not a typical industrial building. It's 184,000 square feet of specialized use that's kind of scary to walk around in, with all the molten lava or whatever the term is, creating these wheels. It's a heavy, heavy use that's going to wear down the building much faster than any of these lighter industrial buildings.
So you concluded value according to the 2 approaches by the income approach, 81 and 8.1 million, and direct sales is 8.3, and you've concluded in between, I guess, at the 8.2, eh?
That's basically split right down the middle.
Okay. I thank you. Robert?
Some of the questions I had have already been asked, and I think it's been quite enlightening in what you presented. Thank you.
Well done.
Oh, let me just ask one question.
Yeah.
On page 39, your income approach, you have got less expenses, and you've got a vacancy expense. What is that all about? You have at the top there, after gross income, you have less vacancy of 10%. But then you also have a vacancy expense. I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I mean it's the same number. It's really the shortfall. It's maybe not the right term. So the city uses the 3.75 a square foot too, and the 2%. So it's the same numbers, maybe just not the same terminology.
All right. I thank you.
The city's high is 9.8, the low 5.5 on industrial.
Correct.
Are you aware of which properties would fall into the 9.8 range?
That's the city's information. I'm not aware of that.
Can I ask you, Mr. Chairman?
I don't have that information with me.
You don't have it with you, eh?
No.
But they'd normally be the pretty rough and tough area, wouldn't it?
That I can't speak to that. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll leave that one alone.
I'll throw one just rough calculation if it's all right. If you take all the city's numbers and use a 7.8% cap rate, which is the 80th percentile that they showed. That results in using their NOI of just a little over 6.3 million. If you take the 6.3 million plus their land value of the 1.8, you come in at about 8.25 million. Just using their numbers and increasing the cap rate to the 80th percentile.
Of 7.8.
Of 7.8.
Now, my other question to you, Mr. Chairman. I see you're disagreeing with Mr.
Absolutely.
Rodney.
Absolutely.
Now, you brought him as your information package, yet you're disagreeing with him. Have they always put the land value on this property, or
We have always had an additional land value applied on the income approach, yes.
and have you ever appealed it before?
No, this is the first time we raised it as an issue.
Have you ever applied to the planning or asked planning if this is there for that purpose, or
I'm sorry, I didn't.
as a buffer? Are they aware that it's there for a buffer, or is this the first time it's come up that it's a buffer?
Yes, we've discussed this previously, that it's a buffer issue,
Yeah.
but they don't agree. But, the real argument is we can't get the income approach applying if we don't have the buffer zone, because you couldn't operate the boundary.
But is there anything else about the property that we should know about?
I think you've got everything. There's one thing, yes, the assessors go and play ball. They have a ball league, and they actually go and play baseball at the field there.
They're not
And
scared
have
of
for
the
many
falling.
years.
And they're not scared of the falling.
They're not scared of the ball.
Maybe they will be now.
They're deliberately trying to poison us?
It's a slow death, we want you to know
Slowly,
that.
slowly.
Do you charge them rent?
If you charge them rent for that?
No, they trespass. No, it's just a store point with the head office, so I've been directed to raise that issue with the board.
I think we've got enough, we can deal with it. Anything in summation? Nothing in summation? Thank you very much for your information. That concludes that matter. Fernand,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice meeting.
see you in another few years. You're coming up for Sid? We're going to deal with 2020 after he's sworn in.
Please state your full name.
Leslie Trustee.
And do you swear the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Stephen, when you're ready.
The roll number is 070103233100. It's 1093 Sherwin Road. The assessed value is $6,164,000. The actual year and the effective year builds range from 1964 to 1986. The wall heights range from 11 feet to 28 feet, and the zoning is M2. The land area is 316,827 square feet. The leaseable area is 175,000 square feet, and it has a land to pile of 1.77. So, turn to page 8. We can get a look at the location of the property. It's on Sherwin Road, just off of King Edward. Page 8, the lower portion of it will give you a look at the street view of the property. Page 9 will give you an aerial view of the property. As you can see on page 9, there is a rail line that runs in behind the building to allow for product to move in and out of. Page 10 just gives you a few other views of the property. You can see the office in the front and the warehouse in the back with some loading doors on the sides for the overhead doors. And page 11, you can get a few more views of it. You can actually see the train in the back with loading or unloading materials. So moving forward, looking at the rent comparables on page 3, they range in rent from $2.96 a square foot up to $5.20 a square foot. The effective years built range from 1956 up to 1979. The wall heights range from 16 feet up to 31 feet, and the leased areas range from 90,257 square feet all the way up to 134,664 square feet. The lease terms range from 3 years all the way up to 19 years, and the lease starts range from 2009 up to 2017. The comparables are on Sargent, Inkster, Kuwait, Mission, and Thief. They're all relatively close to the subject property except for the Mission location. Turning to the income approach. Actually, before we turn to the income approach, I just wanted to go over the land to building ratios for these ones. This one does have lower land to building ratio of 1.77. I'm on my page 3. I'm just going to give you this information. It's not there. So for 1835 Sargent, the land to building ratio is 2.21. 1750 Inkster Boulevard is 2.35. Keewaydin is 3.13. Mission is 2.29, and Thief is 2.20. So they're all a little bit higher than the subject property, but it's important to note that none of these properties have rail access like the subject property does for loading and unloading materials. I would say Mission is the closest one. It does have a rail line running behind it, but they don't utilize that rail line. So now turning to the income approach on page 4, the leaseable area is 175,000 feet. We're applying 2.78 for rent per square foot for a potential rent of $486,500. We're applying a vacancy of 4%, expenses of 2%, and a capitalization rate of 7%. So turning to, for an estimated value of $6,164,000. Rounded, yes. Turning to page 6, you can see the 7% falls between our 20th and 80th percentile, which also follows with the CBRE and the Cushman and Wakefield studies as well. Turning to page 14 and 15 and 16 is the mailer. 18 has the income and expenses for the property. This property is leased out. It recently stepped up to $3.15 a square foot. That's not supplied here, but that was of March 1st of 2018. That is in the appellate's evidence, though. So we feel that the value of $6,164,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Robinson, what type of property would fall beyond the 80th percentile?
What type of property?
Yeah.
I believe that question was asked before.
With the older property, low land to building ratio?
Variance of properties, I would say. Older properties could fall behind it. Properties of very, very large square foot could fall in that area. Properties that are deteriorating, there could be many different reasons for it.
So this particular building has a very large footprint, like it's
Yeah.
it has 175,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Low land to building ratio,
It does have a low land to building ratio too.
very low.
I think
So would based on the conditions that we are seeing with respect to this property, would that fall somewhere close to the 80th percentile or beyond?
No, I think that this is a very typical, like we were talking about before, typical industrial buildings. This one's very, very typical.
Is it? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. I would agree, it has lower land to building ratio. The comparables I used are a little bit higher, but this also has the railway track to utilize, which many of these other ones don't, which would allow them to build out this property, and so that way they don't have to bring in as many trucks. So, and being zoned M2, I believe the zoning itself states that a lot of these properties won't have as much land to building ratio as such like an M3 type property, because the M3 type properties are heavy industrial buildings, and as on the last one we looked at, they were utilizing a lot of the land for their materials and their manufacturing needs, where for, I guess, buildings such as these, they don't need to utilize that land. They'd rather build out the property and use the building itself.
Okay, so you're saying the fact that that the most appropriate cap rate for this building is 7%,
Yep.
in spite of the fact that its land to building ratio is so low, in spite of the fact that it's so old, in spite of the fact that it's such a huge building. So tell me, how easy would it be to transform this building to let's say a multi-use building, or how easy would it be to rent it out to to someone else?
It's kind of interesting. We've seen an example of that at 630 at Kernahan, which was a massive building. I think it's well over 300,000 square feet.
But you would agree that the market is limited for this type of building, for this size of building?
Well, I'm saying that there is a market for it. So
but it's limited.
We've seen it with buildings before. They can put up divising walls and break it up for this.
At a great expense. If demising walls would be constructed, that would be...
Unless, are you referring to these numbers because you're looking at the cap rate, or are you doing it for the rent side? Because you're agreeing with the rent side.
I'm agreeing with the rent side. I'm just asking, I'm talking essentially right now, I'm asking questions with respect to the cap rate.
Oh, okay, good.
Sorry,
That's where my question was.
Okay.
I just wanted to know where it was going. So. You're on.
And what is the actual effective age of this particular building?
Well, we have a range between 1960.
But that's the range, but what's the effective age?
I don't.
Is it 1969?
I do not have the exact effective age with me. I just have the range.
Okay, those are my questions.
Ron.
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Rob.
Thank you. I don't have any either.
Thank you very much. On with your presentation. Les.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to begin with page 2 of the brief, and our arguments are with respect to the non-recoverable expenses. We'd like to those expenses to be installed, and we're using capitalization rate of 8.5%. And with the workup that you see, we're asking for a value of $4,801,000. Now, argument is that this particular building, as you know, as you can see, it's a huge building, 175,000 square feet. And argument is that it's not very easy to rent such a building without making significant changes, without demising walls, and the market for that type of building, in our opinion, is very narrow. So we're asking that the cap rate be increased to 8.5%. And well, the other reason, of course, is that it's an older building. It's a 50-year-old building. If you look at the effective age of being 1969. Pages show the pictures. I'd like to refer to page, start with page 8. These are some of the pictures that we included in the brief. Page 8 to page 10 actually show quite a bit of congestion on this property, and I'd like to argue that the reason for that is because it's the land to building ratio is so low, under 2. I've been to this property, I saw the congestion that's occurring around this property, the parking area, the trucking area. It's not that easy, as I said, it's not that easy to, for vehicles, particularly semi-trailers, to be able to back into the building. So, as I said, we'd like to use a cap rate of 8.5%, and that's above the 80th percentile that was presented by the City of Winnipeg. And the main reasons, of course, are the fact that the land-to-building ratio is so low. It's an older building, 50-year-old building, very huge building, a very limited market for that type of building. So in short, we're asking for 4.801 million. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, in terms of your 8.5% cap rate, on page 18 and 19, you supply cap rate evidence, but none of the evidence goes past, I believe, 7.5 or 7.7.
Well, yeah, on page 17, the average cap rate is 8.29, but in this particular case, we wanted to use 8.5 because of the reasons I mentioned a few moments ago.
But all the supporting documentation you have on page 18 and page 19 is 6.5 to 7 on the high.
Page 19, this is a cap rate study, but it's a cap rate study for investment grade properties. The single tenant industrial high rate is 7%, but in this particular case, we feel that there are particular reasons why 8.5 should be more appropriate.
My other question is that in your evidence on page, you supply the income expense mailer, and you would agree that $3.15 a square foot on page 13 is the rent for this building. Can I ask why you did not use that rent?
Well, we're using modeled rents. Is that not correct? We're using market rents, and so we accepted your model rent for this property. We accepted everything else except we feel that for reasons that I mentioned that the cap rate should be higher.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Right.
Yes, Mr. Stetkowski, I guess I'm looking at your page 17 in regards to cap rate study. So the subject is 175,000 square feet. Okay. So the only thing that I see in your cap rate study, you have nothing, you have maybe two that are over 100,000, okay, and of that two, there is one coming in at 6% cap rate, and another one at 8.47. So, but they're all old sales. So, you probably didn't, or you haven't done, the only current sale that you have is in 2016, which is in January, so on Richard Street. So, so are you relying on this cap rate study, or are you going with the other cap studies?
Well, this particular cap rate study is just additional evidence to support the cap rate study that we would like to use at 8.5. We're looking at the city's cap rate study with the 80th, when one looks at the 80th percentile being close to 8% for, but what we're suggesting is that because of the of this property having some negative aspects to it, we're asking for 8.5%.
All right, I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Rob?
On your presentation on page 3, you keep on talking about the cap rate, but I notice this is also taking 5% in non-recoverable expense.
That's right, and again, we would like that reinstated. I mean, there have been many decisions by this board that have reinstated the 5% non-refundable expenses. If you like, I have evidence here. I mean, I had this evidence here, tried to present this evidence several times.
You didn't mention that. You didn't raise that issue.
Well, he brought it up.
Did he?
Yep.
I didn't hear that.
He did.
Okay. So, in effect, what you're saying is that this should be considered.
In our opinion, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You know that?
Yes, sir.
But in your evidence, you're showing that the average rents are higher.
I'm sorry?
You're showing that your rents in this building are higher. You're also showing no non-recoverables. You're showing them as being collected, aren't you? In your statement? Because it says the recovery income, they're recovering the property taxes. Where's their non-recoverables?
What page are you referring to?
Well, this is in the city's information, I guess. You didn't supply it. You didn't supply their expense, did you? I didn't
I'm
see.
looking-
I saw the summary of the rents, the rent rolls. But I don't see you didn't supply their expense stuff. No, you didn't. I guess I shouldn't ask you about the city's information, but. Well, let's just, last year, when this was before the board, they gave it a 7.75 on the cap rate? Is that not correct?
Yeah.
I was asking him, not you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the hand, Ron.
You're welcome.
Sorry, you still asking that question?
Yeah. Right, he
What page- what page-
can't answer for you.
Yeah, what page are you referring to?
I guess it would be something in the back, your page 16 somewhere, yeah. Your page 16, just back.
15.
Decision was based on a cap rate of 7.75.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, I see the decision.
Are you saying that cap rates have gone up since then?
Well, the board could always be wrong with the cap rate.
They could, you're right. Wrong. I've got no further questions. And I guess we should just deal with the other one and get it out of the way. It's-
The one,
Mark wants to hear you. Or are you going to be a
No.
long time on that one?
oh, I'll be very long there.
Will you? If you're going to be long, I can sit you down to the end. Let's pull up your other file, just because you're here already.
Thank you.
I don't need two shots at it. We're going to move to 889 Aaron. When you're ready, Steve.
The roll number is 1301106008889 Aaron Street. The assessed value is $3,147,000. The effective year and the actual year ranges from 1920 to 1979, and the wall heights range from 10 to 23 feet. So this is an interesting property. Effectively, it started construction in 1920, about 8,000 square feet of it was built. There was then additions in 1946, 1947, 1952, 1958, 1959, 1968, 1971, 1979. So it's obviously a piecemeal type building. So if you look at page, I believe it is 9 of my brief, you can kind of see how it's been built up over time. You can see the different types of roofs on it and the structure of the building. So to say that it is a bit of a piecemeal, I would say would be accurate. On page 8, you can take a look at where it's located on Erin, between Wall and, or I guess in between Ellis and St. Matthews. Again, you can see the street view on page 8. You can see where the 8 loading docks are, well, 8 loading docks are for this building itself. I have inspected this building. It's been a few years since I've been in it, but the office area is upstairs, kind of in that glassed area that you're looking at there. It's kind of interesting because then from that area, it kind of overlooks into part of the production area or the actual, I guess, manufacturing area itself. This building is zoned M1, so it is light manufacturing. It has a land area, it's on page 1, of 149,845 square feet. It does have a basement area of 2,480 square feet, which we're not assessing for, so the leasable area is 136,394. It's got a 1.48 land to building ratio, and does have the mezzanine where part of the office is, and that's 2,770 square feet. Turning to page 3, you can see the rent comparables. They range from $2.96 a square foot up to $4 a square foot. The effective years built range from 1956 all the way up to 1972. The wall heights range from 16 feet up to 26 feet. The leased areas range from 76,924 square feet up to 134,664 square feet. Lease terms range from 2 years up to 14 years, and the lease starts range from 2009 to 2018. And again, these are on Mission, Sherwin, Sargent, and Inkster. So the 2 Sargent properties are probably closest in location to the subject property. Due to the fact that it's got low land to building ratio, I'll give you the land to building ratios for these comparables. Mission is 2.28 or 2.29, sorry. Sherwin, 1093 Sherwin, which we've just looked at, was 1.76. Sargent was 2.21. The other Sargent was 1.78, and Inkster is 2.35. So there are obviously 2 there that are similar to the subject property in terms of land to building ratio. Turning to page 4, you can see the income approach. We've broken this down into 2 different I guess units here, premises. One is 62,462 square feet. This is the one right now that's being occupied. So we're giving a rent of $3.54 per square foot for a potential rent of $221, $115. The next one is right now we consider this part vacant. It's 73,932 square feet, and it's 3.28 per square foot. So this gives us a potential rent of $463,612. We're actually applying a 20% vacancy. This building has been vacant, well, part of this building has been vacant for quite a long time. I think that's due to the fact that it's such a piecemeal building. It'd be on some levels, so they just aren't utilizing the whole building because of that. We've given this an 8.3 capitalization rate, so we can see we're getting higher due to the type of construction of this building, the age of this building. It's for an estimated value of $3,147,000. So that 8.3 cap rate on page 6 falls between our low and our high, 5.5 and 9.8. Again, page 10 shows another view of the property. This is the view from Aaron Street.
So page?
Page 10. I also although this is not being assessed as part of the property, it's a different rule number itself. At 896 on page 10 is a parking lot where they utilize parking for the building. So it's owned by the same owner, and the people who work in this building do park there. Again, page 11 has another view of the parking and the building itself. And same with page 12. Our capitalization rate evidence is on page 13. Our non-recoverable expense sampling is on page 14 to show that the 2% is an adequate expense. Page 15 is the mailer. This is a portion of this building is being rented out, the mailer states. It states that it is a net lease on page 16 for Quest Metals, with a lease start of 2015 to goes to 2021. It says they are leasing out 61,499 square feet at $18,791 a month, so that would work out to about $3.67.
Apologize, what page are you referring to?
Page 16 of my brief.
Okay, and, of course,
$3 and what?
$3.67 a square foot. They have net checked off there, but they aren't showing any recoverables for expenses or anything like that, so I'm not even going to bring that up, but nonetheless, I feel that the value at $3,147,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Questions, Les?
Thank you. So, Mr. Augustine, on page 4, you indicated that 73,932 square feet is vacant.
Yes,
So that equals to about 54% of the total.
that is correct.
And so could I ask you, so do you consider this a chronic vacancy?
I didn't say we consider it to be chronic vacancy, which is why.
I'm sorry.
I said yes.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And what is the maximum amount that one allocates to chronic
I believe that
vacancy?
20% is the maximum that we will allocate for chronic.
20% or 25%?
We have 20% here.
No, but what's the maximum that the department allocates?
I believe it's 20%.
20%.
Well, that is a vacancy that we have on this
Okay.
building.
The last page, page 16, you were referring to in the fact that there's a portion of this property that's rented out. Do you know that Quest Metal is a related company? Did you know that? So is it not, if it's a related company, would it be an arm's length lease?
No, it simply would not be. I do not know if they're related or not, but that's not the evidence I'm using to support my rents. My rents are being supported by my comparables on page 3. I was simply pointing out that was on the mailer, and I even said that they weren't showing any recoverables or any expenses.
And in your page 4, that's based on that's model driven, right?
It's model driven, yes.
So everything model, your rents,
Yeah.
your
Aside from the vacancy, it's not model driven. We've changed the
you
vacancy.
change vacancy. Okay. And now, the effective age. Do you know what the effective age of this building is?
We just have the range there.
So you don't know what the effective age
No, I
is?
do not.
I mean, when you I mean, it's available online, right? You didn't check to see what?
No, unfortunately, I did not check.
Okay. All right. So you're saying 20% is maximum. Sorry. I like to repeat myself sometimes. Now, with respect to the capitalization rate, this particular building, as you mentioned, has low land to building ratio. It's a very old building.
Yeah, it's got a low land to building ratio. Yep.
And you're using 8.3, and so that wouldn't qualify as an outlier when you look at your.
Oh, I think it does, because we put it. It's between the. It's on the higher end, so it definitely qualifies as an outlier. I think that has to do with the age of the building, the piecemeal makeup. Not so much on the land to building ratio. It does not affect the model for cap rates. It's more rent. So.
And you had indicated that this particular building has been built in stages. So if we take a look at page 11 of your presentation, would you say that the newer part of the building is the one that's where the vehicles are parked?
I have it here. Yeah, that was the 1968 edition. Yeah, behind that portion is the 1971 edition. And to the far left The building on page 11, I guess as far down as you go right here, this would be the newest portion. That's the 79 edition.
And the buildings further to the top, those are the older buildings.
Yeah, the initial one, the first building, it's hard to see in this one. It's kind of sandwiched between the end building and another building. But yeah, that would have been the first one built.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
Question, Ron?
You had talked about the building's got a basement.
Yeah, I believe it's got we have a basement of 2,480 square feet, which we're not assessing.
Okay, that's, yeah, I just wanted to make that note that you've given it no value. So this is a normal ratio for an industrial property, I would say, maybe a little on the low side.
Sorry, for land to building?
Yeah.
Oh, I would say it's definitely on the low side, yeah, absolutely.
So
But I think some
what is the norm? Maybe 2%, 3%? Or 3 to 1?
Yeah, I would say, you're looking at probably like, I think it's about 2.68. Actually, Mr. Newman, when he comes up next, he actually has the definitions with him, so we can look at that.
2.68.
Yeah.
2.68? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, without a doubt, this is on the lower side, but I think it's important to note that for M1 zoning and M2 zoning, the zoning itself even states that there's limited outdoor operation and storage. So for these types of buildings, everything's going to be enclosed in them, if that's what they want for these buildings. They're for storage, they're for light manufacturing, and when you do stuff like that, it's going to be enclosed. It's not going to be, you don't need your land to building ratio to be as high as the M3 zoning.
And this is all model driven and
Everything.
The cap rate, there's no overrides or anything like that?
Other than the vacancy, as we've already stated.
And chronic vacancy is normally 25%, is it not?
I think it's also dependent on the building. I don't have the chart with me that where we put chronic vacancy at, but for this building we have it at 20%.
All right, I have no other questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor, could I just maybe ask for a qualification about that question? Because earlier Mr. Robinson mentioned that 20% is the maximum. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that 25% can be applied.
I never said. I said for this type of building we're putting on 20%, which
For this point,
I don't. If we're speaking of the overall model, like I don't know what it is for retail. I don't know what it would be for office. I don't know.
But chronic vacancy is normally at the maximum of 25% by the city. Normal.
Okay.
Normal.
I don't have the information with
Okay.
me. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Rob?
No further questions to what was announced.
You might have a couple. One's going to be, you said 18 to 23. It's 12 to 23, is it not? The ceiling heights?
Did I say 18? I was thinking it's 12 to 23.
I just wanted,
Yeah.
for the record, I know you like making sure the record's right.
Yeah.
And everything else is good. On with your presentation. Please, Les.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by saying that, or referring to my workup, and that there was an error on this particular page, and if you don't mind, I can present you with the corrected workup.
Sure, it'd be nice to have it corrected. Where is
So the error is with respect to the
Square footage.
Square footage, yes, sir.
Oh, you brought the rent down, too. You didn't want to leave it at $5? All your evidence shows $5.
Yes, right.
I mean, the workup shows.
Oh, yeah, the workup
when we
shows
accept.
Oh, you're accepting the city's number,
Yeah.
okay.
So, if we refer to the workup, our argument is based on the vacancy allowance, the non-recoverable expenses, and the capitalization rate. So, as had been mentioned by Mr. Merritt, and we are of the opinion that because this is a chronic vacancy that's been in place for years and years and years, we're asking for a 25% vacancy allowance. we're asking for a reinstatement of the 5% non-recoverable expenses, and we're asking for the cap rate to be increased to 8.5%. And the main reason for that is because of the low land to building ratio, the fact that this is the effective age is 1969, so it's a 50-year-old building. Condition of the building, condition of parts of the building is pretty bad. There's some water leaks, roof leaks, and I like to refer you to the photos that I have attached to page 6 to page 9. Page 6, the photo shows some of the vacancy in this particular building. The following page shows the washing area, bathroom area. I was advised that is blood spattered on the tiles, and that particular washroom is not in use. Page 8 shows the back wall of one of the buildings. I was advised that there's water leakage through this particular wall, and you can see that the wall needs to. That's just a part of the wall. It needs to be reconditioned. And the page 9 also shows more water leakage. You can see the red rust stain on the floor, indicative of the fact that there's water leakage in this particular building. So we're asking for the cap rate to be increased to 8.5% because of the reasons why I stated earlier. That is low land to building ratio, the age of the building, and the condition of the building. So we're asking for a market value of $2,300,000. Thank you.
Questions, Stephen?
For your 5% non-recoverables, did you calculate that out, or is that? I'm just wondering how you came to 5%.
Well, if you add 5% to the figure, that's what it works out to $17,305 based on the 25% vacancy.
So you're calling it a management expense?
It should be non-recoverable expense. The pages that that I just submitted show that it's a non-recoverable expense. That was an error.
So you had $5, but you changed your rent to $3.40 per square foot when you increased the square footage.
Well, I wanted to keep the potential market income. We don't have an argument with respect to $463,000.
And how did you come to 25% vacancy?
Well, as had been mentioned, 25% is the maximum vacancy rate that is allowed for chronic vacancy.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Rob? Rob, you got a question? Robert, you got a question?
No.
Ron?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
And I have none. Thank you very much, Les. We're going to take 5 minutes. We'll go round them up. I'll show you. Let's bring it back into order. That's a difficult position there.
Please state your full name. And do you swear the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Always. We're going to deal with the property located at 16 Winfield Way, right? 15. There we go. Now that I remember, last time I could see it. You're up. Stephen?
Okay. The roll number is 13096006100, 15 Winfield Way. The actual year built and the effective year built are 2000. The wall is 23 feet, and the construction class is metal frame. The zoning's M2. The land area is 55,467 square feet. The leaseable area is 23,000 square feet. We have a land plan of 2.63 for this particular property. Turning to page 2, there is a sale in 2014 for the property for $2.1 million. The sale was researched and verified. that it is an arm's length agreement. So if we turn to page 8, we can get an idea of the location of the property on 15 Winfield Way. This is near Oak Point Highway. It's in Almonds Creek Industrial. Page 8, at the bottom of it has the Google Street View. You can see the overhead doors for the trucks that we can go into. There is one grade loading door. The rest of them are below grade. Page 9 gives you the street view of an aerial view of the property. So you can see it's kind of a pie-shaped property. It's a little different than the usual square that you see. This one's on a cul-de-sac. And again, on page 10, you can see the overhead view. So turning to page 3, you can see the rent comparables. They range in square footage from $6.20 up to $8. The effective years built range from 1974 up to 1970 up to 2002. And the wall heights range from 16 feet up to 27 feet. The leased areas range from 16,808 square feet all the way up to 28,999 square feet. The lease terms range from 1 year to 15 years. And the lease starts range from 2011 up to 2017. So these properties are on Midland, Mountain, Hutchins, Inkster, Century. So they're all relatively close to the subject property. Some of them are in the Inkster Industrial Park. Some of them are the St. James area. Turning to page 4, you can see the income workup. So applying a leasable area to $6.66 a square foot, we get $153,180 for a potential rent. We're applying our 3.5% vacancy, our 2% expenses, and a 6% capitalization rate for an estimated value that's rounded at $2,364,000. Turning to the industrial capitalization rate chart, we can see the 6% falls between the falls between the low and the high for the city's chart. So again, our capitalization rate evidence is on page 11, and our non-recoverable expense sampling is on page 12. Page 13 is the mailer. Taking a look at page 13, you can see they recover most of all of their expenses. They even have a roof repair they're recovering and an HVAC repair. Those are recovered in the common area recovery under revenue. So we see that they are recovering most, if not all, of the expenses for this property, except for mortgage interest, which is not typically an expense for the operations of the building. And then, of course, further down, you can see the rent row where the base rent on page 13 is $6.95 a square foot. And they have a leasable area of 23,000. So, taking that all into consideration, we feel the value of $2,364,000 is fair and equitable. It should be confirmed. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Mills?
Yes, a few, thank you. So let's look at page 4. The 2% allowance for expenses is $2,956, correct?
Correct.
And panel, bear with me, I know most of you have heard this before, the assessors heard this before. Mr. Phillip, I don't think you've heard this before from me. I'll try and be brief on this. Historically, there was an additional 5% allowance, correct?
Correct.
And the department for this cycle determined that it would remove it, and as I understand it, the rationale was that the 5% was intended to be essentially a property management fee, and because under most leases it is being recovered, there was no reason to allow the expense.
Correct.
Okay. And when I say a property management fee, what I have in mind is that if I owned the building and I hired colliers to manage it for me, I would pay them, and that's them getting recovered.
Correct.
All right. So that was the rationale for the department removing it. For this property with this rent structure, the 2% turns it to $2,956. Do we agree conceptually that the purpose of the expense allowance is to take into account those kinds of expenses that a landlord under a typical lease cannot recover from a tenant?
Correct.
And so things like legal or audit are examples of those types of things. Structural repairs, roof replacement.
Not necessarily, no.
Not no.
No, I would say roof replacement is considered a capital cost, so it's amortized over the life cycle of the building or the roof itself, I mean, and so no, I do not consider that a typical structural expense.
But that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you whether replacing the roof is something the tenant typically pays for, and I'm suggesting to you the answer is no.
Okay, and that's fair, but it is interesting in this situation where it seems that the tenant is paying for the roof.
Paying for a roof repair, not a roof replacement. All right. Similarly, a parking lot replacement would not be something a tenant would typically pay for. Agreed? All right. So in this case, it turns into $2,956. Let's now talk about the capitalization rate. When you were presenting your evidence on that, I thought I heard you start to default to the language I typically hear, which is the capitalization rate falls between the 20th and 80th percentiles, but then you corrected yourself to say that it falls between the low and the high. Did I hear that correctly?
Yep, it does fall between the low and the high, yeah.
And so the 20th percentile and the 80th percentile, those are the results of the city's investigations, which indicate that 20% of the buildings have a capitalization rate that averages 6.34%.
Well, it's the 20th to the 80th percentile, so everything in between there is from 6.34% up to 7.8%. Everything from the 20th lower or the 80th above would fall between the 5.5 and the 9.8.
Right, but what they represent, presumably, is that the worst quality buildings are going to be beyond the 80th percentile, and the best quality buildings are going to be below the 20th percentile. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. And that's the point I was making as I put the question to you. And so just in terms of the quality of buildings, and I appreciate there's a progression and there's a variety of variables that will go into this, but part of what's important in the context of an industrial building, I'll suggest to you, is land-to-building ratio.
Yep.
And in fact, the department always displays it on its front page, and in this case, it's 2.63.
Yep.
And I heard you in an earlier appeal talk about a common land-to-building ratio in excess of 3 and as high as 4 and 5 square feet of land to every square foot of building.
Yep.
Okay. Similarly, ceiling heights will be important.
Correct.
Similarly, location will be important in the sense of ease of access to major thoroughfares, that type of thing. So there's a whole variety of variables that go into determining where a building is positioned in the marketplace that in turn will impact the capitalization rate.
Yes.
All right. Similarly, quality of construction is one of those.
It can as well, yes.
Right. And is it fair to say that the best quality of construction, the most durable quality of construction is a concrete building?
I can't, I'm not an engineer, I can't say what the most durable is. A lot of these new buildings they're being built with steel than they are more than masonry, so it seems that the industry is changing a little bit.
Have you heard the phrase tilt up?
I have heard it.
And does that mean in the context of industrial buildings that they're built with walls that are essentially precast off-site and tilted up into place? Mm-hmm. So all of these items go into determining where a building fits into the ranking of capitalization rate, and this building has been fixed at a 6% capitalization rate, and so it is below the 20th percentile, and therefore the conclusion is that based on the variables we've just been talking about, this building is better than 80% of the buildings. Okay. And this building is classified as storage warehouse.
That's correct.
And storage warehouse buildings, by their nature, are the use is less hard on the building than the foundry we heard about earlier, for example.
That's correct, yeah.
Right. Do you know what in fact goes on in these premises?
In this premise, no, I don't know exactly what's going on.
If I told you it was not a storage warehouse, it was a manufacturing facility, would that surprise you?
No, it actually doesn't surprise me because some M2 zoning does have manufacturing in it, so.
Okay. Those are my questions, thank you.
Ron?
I don't think I have any, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Robert?
I just wanted to be, just in the picture, where we go to page 9. So in effect, the buildings that are to the left and to the right don't belong to this,
No.
and behind it does not belong. And these are separate owned facilities.
Yeah, they're all separate owned facilities.
It just looked a little funny. That it was
The lines aren't perfectly drawn on these pictures, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it's also because it's on a cul-de-sac, which is definitely rare for these for industrial buildings.
No, I understand everything else, and I understand the differences that are between the bullet and
My question is just a little technicality. You said that the cap rate was falling in between the 20th and 80th percentile.
I believe I corrected
Was he
myself.
correct yourself?
Yes.
I must have missed
Yeah.
that.
He started to say that and then corrected.
Oh, you did correct it, okay. Very good.
Mr. Newman didn't miss that, so.
See, I missed it. So. Whatever, Mr. Newman didn't ask that question. Mr. Newman, when you are ready, sir. Which brief do you want us to go to first?
Let me start with the non-recoverables first.
You're going to do that to us again.
I am. But it's for Mr. Phillips' benefit. 'Cause
Haven't you heard this yet?
He's not heard it from me.
no from him, no?
Okay, then, by all means, let's have him hear it.
And I will be brief.
Is this the one right here?
Yes.
Yeah. Ron and I are going to
I'm
step
impressed.
up. Ron and I are going to step up.
What you've got are 7 pages of text at the beginning, which summarize everything that is in the numbered tabs. And I'm only going to take you to the numbered tabs to explain what we're doing here. But as the assessor has acknowledged, historically, the expense allowances were both a 5% and a 2%. And on this cycle, the 5% has been eliminated. Now, let's also be crystal clear that this has got nothing to do with shortfall. Shortfall is what tenants who are normally there would pay, but when they're not there and the space is vacant, the landlord has to absorb that cost. We're not talking about shortfall. We're talking about expenses that landlords never recover from tenants, that always get factored into the calculation in the income approach. And historically, that was a 5% and a 2%. The city will say that 5% was really a property management fee, and that's why we removed it. I will say that's not what they said in their manuals historically, and I'll show you that. And I will say to you as well, it doesn't matter what they said historically. I will say to you that 2% is not enough. And when we've got here $2,900 odd, and you have to start doing legal and audit and professional and all the others, and roof replacement and parking lot replacement, $2,900 is not enough. I will also say to you, because the question may arise, the assessor pointed you to the financial statement and pointed to the fact that In the non-recoverable section, all there is mortgage interest, and I will say to you, that doesn't matter. What we are dealing with is the economic life of the building. We're dealing with the life cycle of the various components of the building. We all know from our own common experience that you have a roof. After 20 years, if you're lucky, maybe after 25 years, if you're really lucky, never mind those 35-year shingle promises, you're going to be replacing a roof. We all know that you're going to replace a parking lot in an industrial property eventually. And my view on this matter is what we are talking about is the amortized cost of those expenditures over the life cycle of that component of the building, and that's what needs to find its way into non-recoverables. And bottom line is the 2% is not enough. That's fundamentally the submission I'm making to you. Let me now turn the pages of the attachments again briefly. So tab 1 is an excerpt from the appraisal of real estate, and what it tells you on the first page in the box is that the income approach is an analysis of a property's capacity to generate future benefits. The principle of anticipation. So when I buy a building, when you buy a building, you're buying a future stream of income, and there's an anticipation of what that might be. But equally, there needs to be an anticipation of what the expenses might be, some of which, many of which will be recoverable from tenants, some of which will not, like a roof replacement, like a parking lot replacement, and legal and audit and structural and leasing commissions. Sure enough, we're going to have leasing commissions at some point. You don't get to charge those to a tenant. So that's tab 1. Tab 2, also from the appraisal of real estate, is excerpts dealing with operating expenses relating to properties. It tells you much of what I just told you. If you go to its page number 21.17 in the upper right-hand corner, the third page in, down at the bottom, you'll see a reference to variable expenses. They talk about leasing commissions. If you go to the next page, they talk about maintenance and repair of structure. They talk about a variety of other expenses. These are all the types of expenses that get charged through. And in fairness, I think it's not the department's view that these aren't appropriate expenses. Let's be clear on that. It's the department's view that 2% is enough. That's really what the dispute, I think, has come down to with the passage of these hearings. Tab 3 is an excerpt from the Sauder School of Business at the University of British Columbia. It is one of the main teaching schools for real estate valuation, and the second page of that tab, down in the lower section, leasing and capital costs, non-recoverable expenses, and what it says is the appraiser should also account for non-recoverable expenses, space marketing, tenant inducements, leasing costs, and an allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. Tab 4 is the manual of the city from 1994. As I've said before, because I've been around for so long, I happen to have the 1994 manual on my shelf. And really what I want to draw attention to is the third page in, which is number 20 at the bottom. In the middle of the page it says the following typical non-recoverable expenses were considered. First one is management. Reflects expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable from tenants even with net leases. These expenses involve processing payments and chasing bad debts. Well, clearly that's got nothing to do with property management in the sense of hiring colliers. And if you go over to the next page, they talk about advertising and promotion, professional fees, structural repairs, exclusive of standard maintenance and repair work, because again, typically standard maintenance and repair you can charge through to your tenants, but replacements you can't. Tab 5 is a series of additional manuals from subsequent cycles. The first one I showed you was 1994. We had a new assessment every 4 years back then. Then there's the 1998 manual, which uses exactly the same language as the 1994 manual. You go about 5 pages in, there's the 2002 manual, which again talks about these various expenses that have to be taken into account. And it uses, if you go to, it's page number 11, in the lower right-hand corner, and the words 2002 are also, or the numbers 2002. You'll see the heading management expenses. Even with net leases and competent management, there will still be additional management expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable from the tenants. So I think whatever the city says today, if you look back in time, I think clearly there was a belief that this so-called management item was covering not just a Collier's third-party management cost, it was covering other types of non-recoverables. Tab 6 is an excerpt from the Saskatchewan Assessment Management Agency. This is the assessor in Saskatchewan. This is their manual on office buildings and how they value them. And if you go to page 19, the third page in, 19 at the bottom, they talk about, and it actually begins at the bottom of 18. Again, the heading is non-recoverable operating expenses, typically not included in the lease, legal and audit, structural repairs, and repairs which are capital in nature. This may include things such as roof and wall repairs, parking lot resurfacing, kinds of things I've been talking about, leasing commissions. So there's examples of what Saskatchewan details in their manual. And if you go to page 20, the last page in this tab, and I stress it's only an example, but you see in figure 5 an 8% allowance for non-recoverable expense. Tab 7 is MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. It is the assessing authority in Ontario. It is to much the same effect of what I've just given you and walked you through. And at page 17 in the lower right-hand corner, and again, it's just an example, they show 5% as total non-recoverable expenses. Tab 8 is some decisions. I don't need to go there at the moment. And tab 9 is an analysis I did of 17 buildings and the non-recoverables they were incurring. And when I narrowed that group down to 8 buildings, the most concentrated 8 buildings, I found that the range of expense was 4 to 8%. So I promise Mr. Laurendeau, never again will I do this. And Mr. Merritt, Mr. Phillip, you've now heard it, so I won't do it again. But this is the issue that we're dealing with here when we talk about non-recoverables.
May I have some comments?
Yeah, let's the assessor goes questions first.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out in the appendix 2, I think we pointed this out before, Mr. Newman likes to talk about roof repairs for industrial properties. They have large roofs, it costs a certain amount.
You're asking a question, right?
Yeah, just get it.
You can do your rebuttal after if you like.
Yeah, this is my question. Within your own evidence, 2.21, I guess it's your tab 2, 21, 2 paragraphs down under maintenance and repair, it says alterations including major replacements, modernization, renovations may be considered capital expenditures and therefore not included as a periodic expense under repair and maintenance. So that would include roof repairs, would it not?
It may include roof repairs, but it won't include, yes, it may include a roof replacement, because a major replacement will include a roof, but what it says is they're not included as a periodic expense, which means don't expense it in one fiscal year, you have to amortize it.
Right.
And I agree with that.
Right, okay, but it's a capital expenditure, so if the leaser makes the alterations or in the rented space, the expenses may or may not be amortized by additional rent. In some cases, the tenant may pay for the improvement itself. So this is in your own evidence stating that it is a capital expenditure and that it could be recovered through rent.
So there's 2 things there. Is it a capital expenditure? Yes, I agree it is, and it will be amortized over the term of the lease at the minimum or over the life of the component. Over the life of the component is more appropriate. Secondly, will a roof be recovered through additional rent? No. So that's my answer to your question.
Those are all my questions.
Robert, question?
I do, and have to admit that at this table, I am the rookie, and I am blessed to be with two individuals that are with me on this panel that have much knowledge, and then I lean on that knowledge, and it probably even shows with some of the lack of questions that I ask, because I'm absorbing a lot of things. But I'm trying to use logic here. Okay, so I've got a couple questions, and as I've gone from residential to industrial and so forth, it is totally different and totally new jargon and so forth that I'm really having to learn and grasp. I would make an assumption that since the city had been allowing this 5% over the years, that they did consider that that was a legitimate allowance to be made in the past. Is that correct?
Well, in the past, yes, we did allow it.
In the past, right? And somehow, as you use all these models and you take everything and you put them into the computers and you kick everything out and all of a sudden this comes in, they must have made a decision that based on models that you put in, that 5% isn't needed. Is that correct?
Well, it's not needed because it was used for management, and management's already being recovered through our rents.
But then you seem to be honing in just on management, whereas I think I'm hearing that there are other expenses over and above management. So was management a whole 5%? Or was management 2% or 1% of the 5% of all the expenses?
Sure. The expenses you speak of over and above the 5% is the 2% that we're allowing for non-recoverables.
So, but what you're telling me then is the whole 5% was management?
Yes.
Because you had 7, you're allowing the 2 to cover all these other expenses, but the 5 is just strictly management?
Yeah, that was strictly for management.
Okay. I kind of lost. Maybe it was something else that I was going to say. So in effect, I guess, when I hear you making a presentation here and expecting us to put the 5% back in, I am not quite sure what our rights are when the city ends up saying that they're not recognizing that 5% any longer. Though I guess we do have maybe some cases where we can think that that is legit to put back and accept that. Has the city, has yourselves and your colleagues and so forth, and which is everyone here has been very strong in the fact that you feel that the 5% should still be there, and justified by preparing documentation as well as this has been prepared to justify the 5%. Have you had a sit-down meeting with the city to end up saying, look, this doesn't seem to make sense. All of a sudden, you just drop this on us. Why are we not having...
Well, then they wouldn't need us.
No, you still need us on other aspects. This is just one aspect of it. It's just a small item that is being removed, and it's something that you should maybe... And you might end up getting down and say, okay, we'll give in and we'll give another 2% or another 3%. Whereas, in effect, what you're doing is all these presentations are being putting on our shoulder to make a decision that should be made by them. And I'm finding this kind of confusing as to where we stand.
So I will answer that question for you, and I will tell you what many assessors have told me. So many of the line assessors who sit in these rooms and do these hearings, like Mr. Lowenstein, I'm told they had no idea this was coming. I'm told that when and just so you understand the system,
Sure.
that models get built, and the models generate the assessments, and people like me can then go online starting in approximately mid-May of the odd-numbered years, and we can see the assessments available to us through the city's private website, which you can only get into with the appropriate codes. And as we looked, we saw something's changed. The 5% is gone. What happened here? That led to questions being asked. And as we started to get into the hearings, what we learned was the rationale that you've heard here, that we felt that the management fee was the Collier's third-party property management, and we felt it was being recovered, and therefore we felt it should be removed because it wasn't needed. I will tell you that...
And the theory then being...
Let him finish his answer. Believe me, he's not there yet.
Okay, sorry.
And I will tell you that Going back to 2005, the city did a case involving a property on McPhillips, Garden Oak Shopping Center. And in Garden Oak Shopping Center, the city hired an outside appraiser to put their case in for them. This was at the municipal court. That outside appraiser was a gentleman named Brett Ferguson. And Mr. Ferguson, acting on behalf of the city, expressed the view in that case that the 5% that was being allowed in that case ought not to be allowed because it was being recovered from the tenants. And that's what ended up happening. That was the decision of the board. Why is that important? Because if the city believed that that 5% was truly the third property manager expense only, then going back as early as 2005, the municipal board told them you don't have to allow it. But they continued to allow it for another 14 years after that. That caused me to say to Mr. Jeremy Pohl during the course of the hearing, Mr. Pohl, I want to ask you a question. Was the city just being foolish in continuing to allow the additional 5%? Or did the city continue to allow it because it understood the 5% was not simply property management, but it was intended to cover other non-recoverables as well? He didn't have a good answer for that question, as you may appreciate, and it wasn't it was an unfair question to him in some ways because he's boxed into the position that the department has taken over the years. But your question was, how come there wasn't a sit down, and why is this getting dumped on us and getting dumped on you in the sense that this is my pile of paper, which you may have heard. The secretary has given back to me some of the copies because I recycle them. Because I have to file them on every hearing, so I recycle them. There's a lot of trees that have been killed over this issue. There's a lot of time that has been spent over this issue, and it would have been way better for everybody had the department back in January of 2019 come to the industry, if I can use that word, and say, this is what we're thinking, what do you guys think? Maybe it would have been worked out, but that's not what happened. So here we are.
So the comments that I have to what you just stated, when you have a court case or whatever it was, and that particular court case is a one individual property, and it's a situation that belongs to that court case. In that particular court case, they were recovering that.
Yes.
So as a result, if I could find out that you're recovered, I wouldn't give it to you.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that because one court case showed that it was recovered, that every other property after that is going to be recovered. So you have to end up somehow either giving some flexibility that you look further. Did you recover? Yes. No, you don't get it. Right. You didn't recover? Then you get it. And that to me seems to be the most best way to do it. Now it maybe takes a little more effort on parts of people to find out whether they was recovered or not. And I've seen some situations where they recover it, and some cases where they don't. And if you recover it, why should I give it? Because a city would then say, if I'm giving you that 5% that for Colliers, as you keep raising the Colliers, is the fact that I'm paying for it. The city, the people of Winnipeg is paying for Collier. Whereas you should be paying for Collier because you're recovering it from the tenant. And now you're getting the double dipping.
I don't disagree with you for
so
one moment.
As a result, there has to be just a little more actual, instead of doing a carte blanche, boom, because one thing happened, that goes to there has to be a little extra effort on somebody's part to say A or nay. Because I, poor guy, now doesn't get it, because, and I'm entitled to it, but I don't get it because someone else went ahead and was able to recover.
So I'll give you two responses to that. Firstly, I'll tell you there was a companion case to the Garden Oaks case I told you about, which had a government lease. And under the government lease, it couldn't recover the management fee. And under that lease, the board said, you can get it. In other words, site-specific, look at what's going on.
That's
your point.
What I was saying.
That's your point. The second point I'll make to you is simply that, let's be crystal clear on something. I'm not asking to recover the 5% for property management when I ask you to make an additional allowance of 5%. That's not what I'm asking for. What I'm saying to you is the non-recoverables, the roof, the parking lot, the structural, the legal, the audit, all those other things, 2% is not enough. That's what I'm saying.
Now, I'm just going to finish with my comment and then
Go
carry
ahead.
on.
I'm going to give you lots of room here.
All right. Being an accountant,
I knew that.
You got it, eh?
now, in some cases, it's easy on paper to be able to say we will do this, but in reality, maybe you can't. So what I would say, look, we know that we're going to get the roof. We know we're going to get this, and so forth. So why can't we bury this a little into the rent that we're going to charge? Okay? So this is my basic rent, but I'm going to add a little bit for this and add a little bit for this and this, so that over that term of the lease, I'm going to recover it, because in effect, at the end of that particular time, I've got this cost that I'm now going to have to pay for that roof. That tenant might be gone, and I don't have any revenue. So I'm going to, like a little pocket, put a little envelope here and a little envelope here and a little envelope here, and I'm going to take a little bit out of each one of this rent to pay for those particular things. Now, I ran Elmwood Cemetery, and I created $5 million before I left in an endowment fund, so that when I started, it was broke. And I just did all these things, and I know that the government was saying, you're hoarding things, and I'm saying, no, I make an appropriation for future expenditures, because I know I need mowers, I know I need this, I know I have to trim the trees, I know I have to do this. They don't occur every year, but they occur every second or third year. Where am I going to get the money if I don't put aside each particular year? So, in effect, but you might say the market doesn't allow you to do that. You could end up calculating all you want, but then you go to the thing and say, I'm asking $20, and they say, sorry, we're only going to give you 17 or 18. So maybe on paper it sounds great, but logically it doesn't.
And I'll say two things to you. Effectively, what you did with the cemetery is you created a reserve for the future.
An endowment.
And that's effectively what this process of the non-recoverables does. Some of them are incurred year to year in every period. Some of them are incurred infrequently, periodically. That's why you amortize it. That's my view of the world.
Right.
And most commercial leases are crystal clear as to what is a recoverable operating expense, and more importantly, what is not recoverable. And they lay it out expressly. And that's the problem.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate very much that you allowed me to ask those questions.
I'm glad you got it off your chest, Rob. Do you have a rebuttal to his
Well, I think
his 5%?
I think I'm just going to hand it out. I'm not going to go through it
Okay.
because he
Yeah,
hasn't
we've
seen
heard
it.
it. Yeah.
He hasn't seen it. He has an opportunity to read it over then.
It's good to have an intellectual conversation. Yeah.
Notice you never get those with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the second time I've been here.
We're going to take it as read. Now you want to carry on with your presentation?
Yes, so now I have to deal with value.
Yes.
My value issues are simple. I've got no issue with the rent, I've got no issue with the vacancy, I've got an issue with two things. One of them is non-recoverable expenses. You've heard me on that already. The other is the capitalization. So I have a great deal of difficulty in understanding how this building gets a 6% capitalization rate below the 20th percentile, understanding that the capitalization rates are a progression which reflects the quality of the property, and quality of the property is determined by a variety of variables, which include the construction, which include the location, which include the age, ceiling heights, things like that. And let's be crystal clear on something. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that this building is a dump. I am not suggesting that for 1 second. It is a manufacturing facility, a company called Mercury Specialty Products that does welding and milling. I'm not telling you it's the foundry we heard about, but it is a property that is not a dry storage warehouse where the wear and tear on the building will be much less. So this is a building that will have heavier uses, and I think that needs to be taken into account in addressing the capitalization rate. Similarly, as the assessor noted in his evidence, it's on a pie-shaped, little bit different cul-de-sac. You don't see industrial properties in that kind of scenario very frequently, and I'm not going to belabor that. The pictures make that point obviously. I've also given you, as part of my materials, tab 1 of my main brief, my value brief, not the non-recoverable brief. I've given you an excerpt from the appraisal of real estate. It's a section dealing with industrial properties because it talks about the attributes of industrial properties. If you go, the pages are, there's handwritten numbers in the lower right-hand corner. So the cover page is page 3. If you go to tab 1 of my main brief, if you go to the third page in, it's numbered 5 in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a listing of the functional utility of industrial improvements. And what makes a building better and what makes a building poorer in the progression of advantages and disadvantages that buildings have. And so these are some of the things I'm talking about. And then there's an article that is referenced in this excerpt from the text, and I attached the excerpt from the article, but it's much to the same effect. Is there extra land available that you could expand onto? Clearly there isn't here. What about the ceiling height? It's 23 feet. Actually, the wall height is 23 feet. The clear span within the building will not be 23 feet. It's not bad. It's not the best, but it's not bad. Truck maneuvering distance, not great. Land-to-building ratio, not great. The cul-de-sac makes it a little more complicated to get in and out, I'll suggest. That's part of maneuvering distance. That's what the article speaks about, all of those things. And then if you go to tab 2, so tab 2 is some additional capitalization rate information. And just let me draw to your attention a couple of things. Page number 1 is the assessor's chart, but let's be clear. It's the assessor's chart from 2018. But I'm giving it to you for a reason. Because somebody asked earlier, in an earlier hearing, if capitalization rates have gone up or down. And my answer to you is they've gone up. And the city's own evidence indicates they've gone up. And so you can see for industrial, the 20th and 80th percentiles in 2018 were 6% and 7.5%. But let's be crystal clear. That's for single tenant A or multi-tenant A or what's called industrial A. Now we're going to have to talk about what those things are. When you turn the page to the back side of the page, number 2 in the lower right-hand corner, that's the city's cap rate chart from 2020. You can see the 20th percentile is 6.34%. And so capitalization rates generally have come up by 34 basis points at the 20th percentile and by 30 basis points at the 80th percentile. Why would that happen? Well, what's the engine that drives real estate? Interest rates. Interest rates are the engine that drives real estate. What happened to interest rates? Page 3 is the Bank of Canada rate. What is circled tells you what the rate is at April 1 of 2018, and it was 3.45%. The column below that tells you that at April 2016, it was 2.7%. So the prime rate went up by 75 basis points. Turn the page, and you've got the bank rate. The bank rate was 1.5% at April 1 of 18, our reference date, and at April of 16 it was 0.75%. Again, it went up by 75 basis points. So it's not surprising, I'll suggest to you, that cap rates have gone up, not down, because as interest rates go up and down, so too do cap rates go up and down, because interest rates, as I say, are the engine that drives the real estate economy. Now, I've also got in my materials the Altus Group industrial cap rate study, and I put it there just for ease of reference in many ways. And I'm not going to point to specific property capitalization rates. That's not why I've done this. But if you go to page 9, page 9 is an indication of what the vacancy rates are for single-tenant investment quality properties. And you can see that in Winnipeg, in 2017, it was 8.7%. We are using, in this case, a vacancy of 3.5%, and yet this is a single-tenant property, clearly. We also see on page 11, below the table, well, actually, let's deal with the table. The table is actually the summary of what's in the city's capitalization rate charts that I just took you to. You see on the right-hand side, Colliers single A cap rates, Q1 2018, 6.25 to 7.25. Have in mind, Mr. Phillip, you may be hearing this for the first time, Colliers has a way of calculating their capitalization rates that includes their closing costs. Land transfer tax, for example, is included in the sale price. The effect of that is to depress the capitalization rates to some extent. Mr. Rocky Neufeld, who's a member of the Colliers firm, has been quick to acknowledge that's a marketing ploy by the brokerage side. My point is simply, when you see their reported capitalization rates, probably you need to add 25 basis points to that to take into account the fact that they are including closing costs in the sale price. My point simply is that Colliers reports what they call a single A at 6.25 to 7.25. Let's call that 6.5 to 7.5. Cushman, for an A-class building, is reporting 6.5 to 7. For a B-class building, 7 to 7.75. This subject property I'm going to suggest to you is not an investment-grade building by its size, by its location, by its land-to-building ratio, all of those things. Therefore, it's going to bring a higher capitalization rate. But what have I done? Now I'm going to tell you what my value is. So let's go to tab 1. But I'm going to take you back. I'm going to roll you backwards. Not into tab 1, but I want to take you backwards now. So if you go back one page, you've got some nice overhead photos. If you go 3 pages back, there's my calculation. $1,920,000. Same rent as the assessor, same vacancy, notwithstanding what the single-tenant vacancy is in Winnipeg. I've used the 5%, which is different. I get to an NOI of $124,000. The assessor's at $141,000. I'm at a 7 cap. The assessor's at 6. I'm $1,920,000. Frankly, as I look at this, my value's too high. My cap rate should have been higher. My vacancy should have been higher. I persuaded myself by my presentation today, but there it is. That's my request compared to the assessor's $2,346,000. Thank you for your patience. That is my submission.
$2,364,000.
$2,364,000. I'm sorry.
Stephen, question.
A few questions. So basically, capitalization rate is the big difference aside from the non-recoverable, which we've already gone over.
Yes.
So you don't feel that this is an industrial Class A building? You've stated as much. You feel it's probably more Class B. It's not investment grade.
No.
So we do have some definitions that you've given here.
Yes.
So on page 37 of your brief for CBRE, Class A suburban office and industrial, best as class product, recently completed to high standards, leased to better quality tenants on a 5 to 10 year lease, typically newer construction. Would that not be a good definition of this building?
In some respects, yes. 5-year lease, newer construction, yes. But what I will say to you, it's not a best of class product. It's not a best of class product because of the land to building ratio. It's not best of class because of the location, the cul-de-sac. The ceiling height is not best of class. Typical ceiling height today is 28 feet. So it's not best of class from that perspective.
Yeah, speaking of land to building ratio, on your page 5 and page 8 of your tab 1 of your appendices, it says land to building ratio typically 1.8 to 3.5 for land to building area. And then it also, on page 8, it states as well, roughly between 2.5 and 3.5. So would this, would the subject property fall in those categories?
So what you just read is, in most markets, the typical. So that's what's commonly found, in other words.
Right.
That's not what's ideal.
So that is the typical. for
So
land
a
to
lot of
building ratio.
buildings are built with lower land-to-building ratios because people have shoehorned them in. But if you're talking about
Yeah.
best-of-class product,
Well, it's interesting because for, as I think we've talked about before, usually it's the M3 class that's going to have the M3 zoning that's going to have the higher land to building ratio. The M1 and the M2 usually don't have the higher land to building ratio because it's all contained inside the building. Would you agree with that?
well, it can be, but again, you still need room for a variety of issues outside. You need maneuvering room, you need storage room, and potentially you need room to expand.
So why, sorry, why would they build an industrial building that would have a low land to building ratio then?
Because they could.
So the market would say that.
That's what developers do. They build.
So then an investor would come in and purchase such, because
They would purchase, but at what price is ultimately the question.
those are all my questions.
Robert, do you have any questions, or you petered them all out?
No, I think I'm just fine, thank you.
Good. Ron?
Ditto.
Ditto. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good presentation, thank you.
May I just say ditto too, or?
You did record the whole thing, right?
I'm told that after our hearing of yesterday, your Shingleman got up and said what Mark said.
Yes. What Mark said.
Just give me a moment to go wash it.
Yeah. What did I just do? What did I do? This already we've gone through.
Couple more weeks, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, we're gonna take a break. Shut it off. I gotta find the last one. There it is. Goes like that. We'll call the meeting back to order. Want to swear him in? Mr. Smith, welcome.
Would you like to swear in our firm, sir?
Yeah.
Please state your full name.
Trevor Smith.
And you swear the evidence you represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Stephen, when you are ready, 1300 Inkster Boulevard.
The roll number is 14063660100, 1300 Inkster Boulevard. The assessed value is $3,802,000. The actual year and effective year bills range between 1959 and 1989. The wall heights range between 20 feet and 29 feet. The zoning's M2. The land area is 129,431 square feet. The gross floor area is 67,612 square feet, and the leasable area is 64,232 square feet for a land to plan of 2.02. So we'll turn to page 8 and look at some pictures quickly to get an idea of where the property is located. The property is located on Inkster, between Shepherd and I believe Phillips. Page 8 gives you a street view also of the picture. Page 9 you get the overhead view of the picture to see how the layout of the building looks. Page 10 you get another overhead view. And page 11 you can see where the trucks can access the overhead doors to the building. They come in off of Bunting Street. It looks like not Inkster Boulevard, so a little less traffic obviously. So turning to page 3, we'll go over the rent comparables. The rent comparables are in Inkster, Hutching, Mountain, Lagimodi, Thief, and Almonds Creek. The majority of them are close to the subject property, aside from Lagimodi. The rent per square foot ranges from $5.25 per square foot up to $6.75 a square foot. The effective years built range from 1963 up to 1989, and the wall heights range from 17 feet up to 30 feet. So these areas range from 44,000 all the way up to 57,500, and the lease terms range from 2 years all the way up to 11 years basically, and the lease starts range from 2012 up to 2017. Turning to page 4, we can see the income workup. We're using 64,232 square feet applied to $4.52 a square foot. We're then applying a vacancy of 3.5% or expenses of 2% and an overall capitalization rate of 7% to get a value of $3,802,000 rounded. Again, our 7% falls between the 20th and the 80th percentile on page 6 for the capitalization rates. Turning to page 12, you can see the capitalization rate evidence. And page 13, the non-recoverable expense sampling, which justifies the 2% non-recoverables. This is an owner-occupied building, as stated on page 15 of the mailer. So only expenses are showing. There is no income for the building. We feel the value at $3,802,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, questions?
Yes, just a few. Looking at the front page here, so the subject property is, parcel use code is industrial heavy manufacturing.
Yeah, that's just an internal code that we use. The actual zoning is M2, so general manufacturing.
Right, but, so the internal code is heavy manufacturing, correct? And if we look at the lease comparables on page 3, are these heavy manufacturing?
Well, they're all similarly zoned M2. Mountain is zoned M1, so that would be light industrial manufacturing.
So the zoning is the same, not necessarily the use.
Zoning, I'm not too sure what the parcel code use are for these particular buildings.
I don't want to delve into them too deeply necessarily. The 955 Lagimoji, I guess that's the fourth one down there on page number 3. So the tenant there that is being referred to was a tenant called Prime Source. Is the city aware that that tenant left and the space was vacant for some time and was marketed for sale and for lease prior to the valuation date?
I'm not aware. We have the 2012 lease start, so in 2012 that's what their lease was stating.
And there's a lot of information. I grant you that it's not easy to keep track of all the properties out there, obviously. So just looking at these properties overall, is it fair to say these would be superior to the subject?
Well, I guess when we're looking at the criteria of effective year built, wall height, leased area, and I guess area, I would say like Inkster, Hutching, Mountain, Thief, they're all very close proximity, close in age, similar wall heights, so similar square footages. So I wouldn't say that they were superior. I'd say they were in terms of what we look at.
Okay. I'm trying to avoid going into them deeper here, but I'll ask one more question.
Sure.
So 1750 Inkster Boulevard, is the city aware that this property was significantly renovated, where the facade office area was redone, the entire loading court was redone and improved, additional loading added to it, significant upgrade to the property prior to the lease commencing?
I can't say I'm aware of that.
Okay.
Values model driven, obviously, just looking at the inputs there. And again, similar to my questions on the lease rates, I understand there's a lot of properties and perhaps you individually wouldn't have necessarily time to investigate this. Is the city, however, and I had this discussion yesterday, aware of the circumstances surrounding the sale of 90 Park Lane Avenue? I'm looking at page 12 and the industrial cap rates that are included there.
Yeah. And what is the issue that you're referring to?
So there was no tenant in place as of the valuation date. It had been vacant for
So
a
I think
period of time.
this has been addressed before in the sense of that this is stabilized over a period of time, and there was a tenant in it, I think, about 2 months leading up to the sale date.
So my question would be, how can a cap rate be developed if the property is not purchased for an in-place income stream?
Well, I think the point
If there is no in-place income stream, it's not an investment purchase. There is no cap rate, correct?
There's an income stream leading up to basically 2 months before the sale, so I think you can look at it and stabilize it over the period.
I will leave it there. I don't want to get into it further. It's been dealt with several of the board members. I'll just leave it at that point. The issue of the non-recoverables has been has obviously come up before the board members before and before the individual assessor. I have discussed it. Everybody has discussed it at length. Suffice it to say, this is the first year that the city has made the adjustment in the model by taking out the 5% recovery in addition to the 2%. That's correct. Recovery. And in prior cycles, many prior cycles, that 5% was present in the valuation model. Correct. And that the city's position is that 5% represented the recovery of property management fees that were already recovered and therefore should be eliminated. That is our position. Thank you very much.
Ron? No, thank you. Robert?
I have no questions.
I'm good. On with your presentation.
Okay. You've heard extensively about the 5%. I did not bring my rebuttal package today for submission. I was here this morning and didn't have time to return to my office and bring it back. Suffice it to say, my comments would largely echo Mr. Newman's with regard to the 5% non-recovery, the reasons for it, and the rebuttal information that I generally distribute, which I'll rely on the panel members to recall from past hearings, is simply showing that the City of Winnipeg has stepped outside of the accepted theory for the income method of valuation in eliminating this non-recoverable expense allowance to the degree that they have in their model. If you look at the province of Manitoba in the current 2020 assessment cycle, they have followed their past practice over many years and are still allowing for a 5% what they term management allowance, as well as the 2% other non-recoverable allowance, in addition to the shortfall allowance and the vacancy in their models within the province of Manitoba. So that's under the same jurisdiction as Winnipeg. The province has ultimate authority on assessment matters, and the city is given I guess reign over the city of Winnipeg. However, the act is such that they would fall under the province. If you go outside of the Manitoba's jurisdiction of Manitoba, and you look at both Saskatchewan and Ontario, both of our immediate neighbors, both of those jurisdictions make additional allowance for non-recoverables beyond the 2% that the city is currently allowing, and they point directly to the line items that would be allowed within that non-recoverable component as well. So that's my verbal rebuttal, I suppose you could term it, if you want to call it that. I can answer questions on it if anybody has any.
No.
Yeah,
No. You have a question?
well, you were talking about, you referred, and the reason I'm asking is because you referred to the Ontario and also
Saskatchewan.
And they're allowing 5%, or they're allowing a certain percentage?
They're allowing an additional amount above that accounts for the non-recoverable items that we're outlining in both our brief and other appellants' briefs.
I know this is but in Manitoba, and I don't know if I could ask this question, but in Manitoba, outside the city of Winnipeg, and there would be some assessments that would be doing on manufacturing companies that are outside, has there been allowance of non-recoverable outside the city in the province of Manitoba, which might induce people to leave the city of Winnipeg and go ahead and put up their plants and locations outside?
So in the province of Manitoba's valuation model, and again, it's in might even be in my brief, I'm not sure. In any case, I've had a number of appeals in the 2020 cycle as well as past assessment cycles, and the province of Manitoba Assessment Department is still including the 5% management allowance, which is non-recoverable, as well as the 2% other allowance, which is structural, as well as shortfall. So within the province, they are still following the same methodology as they always have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I know I could ask something else, but I don't think I should.
Well, you can. I'm happy to answer whatever your questions are. It's up to you.
I might not be here any further.
Okay. Any further questions?
Oh, I do have one of your presentation.
Oh, I have.
On your page 15.
So I haven't
He hasn't done
presented
it yet.
Oh, you haven't done that?
No.
Oh, okay.
He's just done 5%. He's getting there though, Rob.
I'm getting a little long.
You're just getting ahead, that's good.
Okay, thanks.
Finish it up.
All right, 1300 Inkster. So this is a manufacturing facility owned and occupied. There is no arm's length tenant in place, so there is no revenue generated here as an income producing property. They have expenses but no revenue to rely on, so they obviously occupy it themselves. VAW is a manufacturer of air makeup system components, air conditioning components, HVAC components. It's a heavy industrial use where they manufacture the components on site and then distribute them from their facility. If you look at my page number 1, with regard to the property, you can see the appeal history for the subject going back a number of cycles. I would point out that we currently have the 2018 decision of the Board of Revision appealed to the Municipal Board, and we're awaiting scheduling on that. We're looking at roughly, well, we are looking at $1 million increase virtually from the 2018 assessment to the 2020 assessment. I didn't work out the percentage, which I generally do, and we're looking at what, a roughly 30+% increase in value there, 40%. Whatever that works out to. Again, this is not borne out. This is not borne out in the marketplace. We don't see rises of that significant in nature for an industrial heavy use property such as this in the Winnipeg marketplace over that short a span of time. Looking at further detail, property zone M2, manufacturing general. The original structure was built in 1959, composed of 16,392 square feet, so generally
quite an older original structure. To that, they added on in 1989, 47,840 square feet, so quite a significant addition, and our total comes to 64,232 square feet of leasable area. Single tenant industrial, our site area is just under 3 acres, as you can see, and the land to plan area ratio is a very low 2.01 to 1. I will get to that in a moment. We can go through a couple of quick photos on it. We have some exterior photos. The first one is from Inkster on the top of page 2. The second one is from our side street, looking at the entry to the yard area. You can see the 4 loading doors that they have on site there directly in. And if we flip to the top of page 3, we have an aerial view of the property. Now, there's a further site photo further on, but if you look at this, you can see that the actual loading court is very limited in terms of area, in terms of getting trucks in and out, maneuverability, any storage of trucks on site and then backing them in would be very limited. Often they have need of their yard area for storage of product or materials that they use in the production of their product. And it is a very limited exterior space. So that is a significantly limiting factor for this particular site at 2.01 to 1. It also limits the amount of space for the company itself to provide parking to its employees and any customers or visitors that are coming on site. As you can see, there's significant parking that is on the side street itself there as we look at that aerial. Moving on to the photographs, there's not as many as there should be. We had an issue in the past with regard to mezzanine space. We don't this time. I see that the majority of the photos that are included are pointed towards mezzanine space. However, if you look around that, you can see the general structure of the facility itself. Steel frame building, at least the addition on concrete slab with supports, steel frame roof, etc. Fairly straightforward. Our description of the property is relatively extensive. It's on page number 6. The original masonry structure built in 1959, a significantly older property for Winnipeg, over 16,000 square feet, exterior wall height of 20 feet. There's further description in there. Much of that is office space, and we have the addition built in 1989, where we have lower masonry walls with metal panel upper walls. Steel frame, exterior wall height of 29 feet, and the area of 47,840 square feet. It's getting late in the day. The description of foundation, etc., is there for you to look at, as well as power supply, etc. Looking at the text following that, with regard to the gross building area and the mezzanine, this is an issue that's been solved. It was not solved last time. We didn't remove it. For some reason in this particular brief, I think we can disregard that particular component, as we're in agreement now on the leasable area, which is nice to see. As a single occupant, single tenant building, essentially, you're looking at 64,000+ square feet. This is a significant size manufacturing building in the Winnipeg market. It's getting certainly towards the upper sides of properties out there for single tenants, single occupants. There are larger ones, obviously, and I represent some of them up to 550,000 square feet. However, this
particular one, as you get closer towards the 100,000, you're certainly on the upper end of any tenants that are out there or occupants in terms of purchase of the building as well. The site description is on page number 8. I've given you some text with regard to this. Again, site coverage, you're typically looking for 4-to-1 ratio as an ideal starting point. Often it does vary from that. In some cases you get additional area, and in some older areas you end up with smaller site coverage, which is obviously not ideal. In the subject case, 2-to-1 is very low, and it does cause them issues on site in their actual production, which it would for other manufacturers of the same scale using the same building. The building itself is pushed right up against both the southern and eastern lot lines as well in its development. So they've maximized the actual use of the site in the location of the building. So there's no additional capacity here to expand and or have on-site storage. Property is located obviously in Inkster Industrial Park, as shown on page number 9. You can see the location of it, and we can move into the valuation itself. Owner-occupant property, so we need to look at the market for an appropriate rent. What we have provided here is properties of a certain scale that that would be comparable to the subject. So we have 4 of them. The first property, 1155, lease in 2017 of a little over 100,000 square feet at $4.50 a square foot. This is Penner International, building built in 1979, high wall height. This is a warehouse facility, likely considered superior to the property. However, they have 108,000 square feet. It's a little larger on that. 680 Mission Street. This is a manufacturing facility in St. Boniface, lease in 2016 of $4 a square foot, 122,000 plus square feet, built in 72, 18.5-foot wall height. This is Carlson Engineered Composites. This property would be, again, the lease is larger. It would be somewhat inferior to the subject property, so I'd expect at least a rate higher than that. Reliance Products, 175,000 square feet, lower ceiling height, or similar ceiling height, built in 64. I would consider this particular property to be inferior to the subject as well. They have a rent rate of $315 as of 2018. That was a renewal. And finally, we have 1450 Mountain of just under 100,000 square feet at $4 a square foot rental rate, 27-foot wall height, so considerably higher wall height. They're at 20 to 29, they're 27. I think that's more overall for them, whereas ours is a portion at 20, portion at 29. Subject property, heavy manufacturing, there's less demand out there for these, certainly less tenants. $450 a square foot is certainly an appropriate rental rate, and we've got market evidence there for you. Let's move on to expenses. If we look at the expenses in the Winnipeg, or rather vacancy in the Winnipeg marketplace, we give you the Johnson stats. This is actually 2017, not 15, as it states in the text. These are 2017 numbers. The overall industrial vacancy is representative of owner occupants as well as investment buildings. It's always going to be lower as owner occupants are owner occupants. Investment vacancy, 7.3% at point in time, 5-year average of 6.8. So we're looking at roughly 7% on investment. Single tenant investment vacancy, 7.3, 5-year average of 7%. Generally higher vacancy in these properties. We're not asking for 7%, but we are looking at an appropriate level at 5% as far as vacancy goes.
The expense allowance, and I will run through this quickly because I don't believe Mr. Phillick has heard this directly from me. The expense allowance issue that we're discussing is obviously in regard to the non-recoverables. I'll skip the first line. It's 2% allowance for replacement reserve of the effective gross is currently allowed by the city. This typically is specific to structural allowance and has been stated as such in past cycles. When we do appraisals, you can do a percentage, which is generally in that 2% range, or you can do it on a per square foot basis. And if you do it in that manner, it's typically in that 25 cents per square foot up to $1 per square foot in terms of an allowance for structural, which generally comes in at around a 2% vacancy allowance or 2% expense allowance for structural. The 5% management expense that was previously allowed was always intended to be representative of the non-recoverable expenses that any owner incurs in the marketplace that are not recoverable from a tenant in a standard lease. If you read the lease terms, it's very clear what is outlined as to what can be recovered from tenants, and it's very clear as to what cannot be recovered from tenants. Those expenses that fall outside of the standard lease terms are non-recoverable expenses and are borne by the owner and serve to decrease their net income on the property. The Appraisal Institute of Canada is the governing body of the appraisal profession in Canada, and the standard text that we use is the Appraisal of Real Estate, 3rd Canadian edition, as stated on my page 13. In reference to the income approach to value, it's very clear how this is done. The calculation is shown there at the bottom of page 13. And you have potential gross income less vacancy and collection loss equals effective gross income minus operating expenses that are paid by the landlord, stabilized annual expenses, non-recoverable expenses, equals your net operating income. So that is the methodology, and what we're dealing with here is the methodology and the amount and what's included. So if you look at the operating expenses paid by the landlord, the line items that would fall under that have already been out, many of them have already been outlined by Mr. Newman. If you look at my page number 14, the line items, or the expense categories rather, that would fall within this non-recoverable range would include, as Mr. Newman mentioned, professional fees, legal, accounting, other professional fees. There's discussion regarding asset management. This is a very minor component in the marketplace. I am not going to make a big deal about it. It's few and far between as far as properties that would have asset management. That is limited generally to your large corporate investment owners. Landlord work. Landlord work is work where they're preparing a unit for occupancy simply to bring it up to shell space condition, not to provide tenant improvements, etc., just to make it bare bones occupiable. The fact of leasing commissions has come up. There's no tenant out there that is going to pay for the landlord's leasing commissions to put themselves as a tenant in an owner's building. That's a non-recoverable expense that the owner must bear. Tenant improvements, there's lots of discussion with regard to this. Tenant improvements is the amount of money that the owner must pay to build the space out to the spec of the tenant themselves. What this does is drive up the rent that is paid by the tenant in place. So the face rate that the tenant will pay increases based on what work has to be done and what the agreement is structured between the owner and the tenant. However, It's not all recovered through that rent, and there's an element generally that is not recovered, and that would fall onto the non-recoverable side as well. Beyond that, we have owner repair and maintenance outside of standard structural repair. Items such as parking lot, etc., would likely fall within that category. You have marketing, leasing of the building, expenses with regard to that. You have, in a competitive marketplace, you have tenant inducements. So where you have a competitive market and you have lots of space available, sometimes you have to offer free rent or other inducements to a tenant. That is a non-recoverable expense to the owner as well. They would not have that tenant if they didn't offer it. Credit checks, and in very limited cases, there are some property management fees. By and large, in the marketplace, property management has always been recovered under standard lease terms. It's still recovered under standard lease terms. This hasn't changed over time. Just to be very clear on this point, it has always been that way. There's nothing new under the sun here. Property management has always been recovered under normal lease terms. So the removal of 5% as a property management is not accurate. It was never there for that purpose, as already discussed and presented on by Mr. Newman. The only cases that fall outside of that are some government leases where they're semi-gross and they exclude certain expense categories, or very rare tenants where they have a lot of sway and they can exclude it. It's a rare circumstance, virtually always recovered. This issue, as Mr. Newman pointed out, with regard to the non-recoverables, is relatively recent. Came up in June of this year. We spent a portion of the summer doing an analysis of the 5% non-recoverable issue, or rather the non-recoverable issue, and what the percentages would be of affected gross income on a standard property out in the marketplace. We did a 3-year study, and it is presented on page number 14. We looked at 2 methodologies. We did non-recoverable expenses exclusive of tenant improvements, as we knew that was going to be a point of discussion, and then we had non-recoverable expenses inclusive of tenant improvements. Our properties that we had full access to financial data on varied between 45 and 53 properties in that time frame, as you can see on the chart. And our expenses, average expenses on a 3-year average over that span, non-recoverable expenses exclusive of TI were 11.5%, inclusive of TI were 12.7%. Now that's a 3-year window. It's not perfect. It could be longer, but in the time allotted, that's what we have been able to do. It's certainly a significant study. It was fairly, there's variability in the marketplace without question. This includes both retail, office, and industrial properties. So one could break it down further, given unlimited time and resources, and do a specific study by asset class. Suffice it to say, what we found was that the non-recoverables were actually higher than what the city has allowed for at 5% and 2% in the past. However, at this point, we're not asking for an increase to it. We potentially, I suppose, could in the future if we study this further and feel that it's warranted, but at this point in time, we're simply asking for the reinstitution of the 5% non-recoverable in addition to the 2% structural allowance. So, moving on from there, shortfall allowance, we have deferred to the city's rate of $3.75 a square foot. When we look at the expenses for the property, they come to $9.23 a square foot. It's not necessarily appropriate to apply a higher shortfall rate
for every manufacturing facility, they will have some higher expenses, obviously. I would say generally the shortfall would be higher here, but we're not going to ask for it in our valuation of the property. Let's move on to cap rate on page number 15. And there's a bit of text at the top of the page with regard to the main commercial brokerages and their cap rate ranges for investment grade properties for the 2020 cycle. Much has been said about this. This is their brokerage arm giving their perspective on cap rate ranges. And as already mentioned, the studies that they do, or the figures that they present, are based on representing an investment to a purchaser and what their whole cost will be in acquiring it. So they include factors such as closing costs, so your land transfer tax, any brokerage fee, things of that nature are taken into account. So generally, they're roughly a quarter point low on the whole. So Colliers 6.5 to 7.25, CBRE 6 to 7.25% for investment grade assets. So what do we have here? We have a single tenant, heavy industrial user, low land to building ratio, limited on-site storage, limited loading access, or challenged loading access. Portion of the building was built in 1959. You have less users, less purchasers for a property of this size, of a manufacturing nature in particular. Our own cap rate study is shown on page 15, and our cap rates are generally in that 7 to 7.5% range for investment properties. These were properties purchased for their in-place income. Subject property is not using a 7% cap rate, it's using a 7.5% cap rate for the reasons that I have outlined here. So using our 7.5% cap on the net income gives us our final market value of $3,244,000. If you flip back to my first page, you can see that this is an increase over the 2018 assessment. The addenda materials include the income and expense information, as well as supportive documents or supportive decisions from the 2020 cycle on other industrial properties that have been appealed in the 2020 cycle. 680 Mission, which was one of our lease comps I represent, decided at 7.75% cap on our analysis. Smaller multi-tenant at 7.5, 55 Furniture Park, 8.75. That's a significantly larger manufacturing facility. There's a number of them there. I'll leave that to you. There's also some documentation with regard to the 5% non-recoverable. I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Stephen.
Just a few quick questions. Your vacancy rate's at 5%. You referenced the Johnson report. In 2017, they had the Inkster Industrial Park for single-tenanted buildings at 3.4%. Do you feel that's a more accurate reflection of the vacancy in the area than your 5%?
Sorry, the 3.4 was what?
For a single-tenanted in the Inkster area for 2017.
Point in time? No, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. If you look at the information included, investment vacancy typically is hovering around that 7%, both point in time and on a 5-year average. So at 5%, we're being conservative. And again, the building goes vacant, it's entirely vacant as it's single occupant.
In terms of your capitalization rate study on page 15, are any of these heavy industrial manufacturing uses?
No, and of course, that's the challenge that we face, is that they're generally owner occupants, so it's difficult to necessarily find cap rates on manufacturing facilities out there. I know that at one point 680 Mission had been for sale, but it was not, it was never actually sold.
So Hutchins and Logan, 2 and 5, are probably the two closest sales. They're both single tenanted, like subject property. They range between 7 and 7.2%.
Bates was also single tenant.
A little further away, but again, 7.4, and you've chosen 7.5.
The Bates would be a superior property to the subject at 7.4. It's in the St. Boniface Industrial, more recent property, better construction, better loading, etc.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Ron.
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Robert.
Yeah, I have a few. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Very welcome.
On page 15,
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of it, you say, considering the factors associated with the property as an investment, a capitalization rate of 7% is considered fair and reasonable.
He corrected that. It was a typo.
Yeah,
It should be 7.5.
I do apologize for that. Sometimes I don't have time to review what is
Okay.
put out.
I apologize, I was calculating something.
It's quite all right.
And then going further down to your calculations, I guess I've never calculated this, but the shortfall amount of 3 square feet, you got 375, you got 12,044
Mm-hmm.
on a lesser amount than the city has, and I'm wondering at 8,430, how do you get 12,044?
So our vacant area, so if you use 5,000 square, so just to, and I think I see your confusion. So what I have included on that chart at the bottom is, and the headings aren't there for some reason. This is not my best brief in terms of that. The left-hand column is our valuation. The middle column, oh, the headings are there, pardon me. Middle column is City Winnipeg 2020, and the right-hand column is City Winnipeg 2018. So you can see the changes there. The 5% of the 64,232 gives us a vacancy of 3,212 square feet. At 375 gives us the $12,000 shortfall. So
Because he's got a higher percentage on his vacancy, it gives him a bigger square footage. Did you get that, Robert?
we have a greater vacancy allowance.
Yeah, you use 5 instead of 3.5.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So did you explain why you used the 5 instead of 3.5? I guess I was sleeping, or was
You might have been sleeping at that
I
time.
may have lulled you to sleep there, I'm not sure.
No, I guess you know what I was.
As long as we each take a turn doing that.
You know, I was sitting here listening, but also trying to figure out the calculations, and I think I maybe missed some of your conversation. My apologies.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. I got the answers.
You're good, I'm good. That's it, gentlemen. Thank you very much. It's been a slice. Shut her down, please. See if we have time for dinner before